What you are about to hear will make you look at parenting your children in a completely different light. This shocking story of a 17-year-old girl who was brutally murdered and buried in a grave by her own boyfriend, and I truly believe that watching this video could save your child's life. Jayden Parkinson was a girl who radiated joy and a love for life. Her slightly mischievous nature harmoniously combined with her natural charm. From her early years, there was a special bond between Jayden and her mother, filled with love and trust. The girl's openness and friendliness helped her find many friends at school. Everyone who knew Jayden noted her sensitivity, cheerful disposition, and kind heart. Studies came easily to her, and her dream of becoming a hairdresser inspired her to move forward. But at the age of 7, Jayden's life underwent a dramatic change. Her parents decided to divorce. Custody of the girl, as well as her brother and sisters, was unexpectedly awarded to her father by the court. Together with the children, he moved to Oxford in the United Kingdom. This move was a real shock for the Parkinson family, especially for the children who were used to the atmosphere of love created by both parents. They missed the fun holidays and pleasant surprises that mom and dad would arrange to please them. It remained a mystery how the father managed to get custody of the children. It was clear to everyone that this decision was a real blow to both the children and their mother. It hit Jayden especially hard, as she had an extremely close relationship with her mom. Family friends claimed there were no obvious conflicts or negativity between the couple. However, despite all efforts, the mother failed to defend her right to stay with the children. The teenage years brought new trials for Jayden. Her irrepressible energy and awakened rebellious spirit complicated her father's attempts to cope with his daughter's upbringing. Despite the fact that the girl retained her kindness, charm, and wonderful sense of humor, she faced typical problems of the transitional age, especially after moving to high school. Relations with her father became increasingly strained, despite his sincere attempts to surround the children with care and provide them with everything they needed. Nevertheless, he was stricter and more demanding compared to their mother. At this age, Jayden perceived her father's care as a restriction of freedom and a manifestation of excessive control. The situation was aggravated by the lack of regular communication with her mother, whom the girl missed terribly. All this led to constant conflicts and misunderstandings. In search of understanding and support, Jayden began to run away from home. This problem, unfortunately, is quite common among teenagers. But it is worth noting that the girl did not wander the streets or questionable companies. Instead, she would immediately go to her mother to spend time in the comfort of her home. At the same time, Jayden did not stop communicating with her father, answered his calls, but at the first opportunity, tried to return to her mother, because it was with her that she felt truly loved and understood. Despite all the trials, that special bond between mother and daughter remained. It seemed that the difficulties of adolescence only strengthened their relationship. During one of these visits to her mother, 14-year-old Jayden met a guy named Jake Blakely, and through him, his older brother Ben. At that time, Ben was already 20 years old. Despite the significant age difference, a mutual attraction arose between Jayden and Ben, and they decided to try to build a relationship. This decision caused an ambiguous reaction in those around them. Some believed that such a choice of partner indicated the emotional immaturity of the young man. However, Jayden herself seemed very attracted to the idea of dating an older guy. Of course, due to her age, she still remained naive and could not always cope with her emotions and feelings. But despite all the warnings, a romantic relationship full of hopes and expectations for a happy future began between these two young people. Jayden dreamed of a happy future, not realizing that her fate was already in the hands of a real monster. From the moment Ben became Jayden's boyfriend, he began to actively integrate into her environment, striking up acquaintances with his girlfriend's classmates. Despite the obvious difference in life experience and views, he managed to find a common language with the school children, and even to some extent become a leader for them. In parallel with this, Ben began to surround Jayden with excessive attention and care, which made the girl fall head over heels in love with him. It seemed that he completely captured her thoughts and feelings. Ben would tell her about a bright future together, painted vivid pictures of their life, built castles in the air. The naive young Jayden believed that it was with him that she would be able to achieve the happiness that her parents had once failed to achieve. But the period of romance and carefree life did not last long. Later, Ben's behavior began to take on more and more possessive and manipulative features. Insults and humiliation began. Just a month after the start of their relationship, he first allowed himself to treat Jayden really rudely. The girl, who found herself in a relationship with a guy for the first time, and much older than her, began to look for the reasons for such a change in herself, in her possible shortcomings. Ben masterfully exploited her insecurity, noticing that Jayden was succumbing to his influence. The girl's naivety allowed him to find fault with any little things in her behavior or words. He arranged real emotional swings for her. At one moment he could say how charming and beautiful she was, and the next moment accuse her of terrible things. Especially often jealousy became a reason for accusations. Ben would come up with a variety of reasons to accuse Jayden of betrayal and deception. It was during this period that the girl found out that her boyfriend was periodically using illegal substances. His emotional instability and mood swings were partly explained by this fact. But all signs indicated that verbal abuse would not be limited to this. When Jayden was already firmly attached to this toxic relationship, Ben's behavior became truly aggressive and cruel. Once, when they were walking with the girl's group of friends, he began to openly express his dissatisfaction with them. This was a typical manipulator tactic, trying to isolate his victim from a close environment, to isolate her from friends. Unfortunately, Jayden did not realize what was happening at that time. Each claim or reproach from Ben made her feel guilty. She really began to believe that it was her behavior that was the cause of all misunderstandings and conflicts. It was then that Jayden first dared to stand up to her boyfriend. She defended her right to communicate with friends, which caused Ben's furious anger. He resorted to a variety of manipulative techniques to make the girl quarrel with her friends. Jayden tried with all her might to maintain these friendly relations. But gradually, everyone began to turn away from her because of the toxic behavior of her boyfriend. Despite everything, feelings for Ben did not fade, although his behavior was becoming more and more outrageous. Once he even allowed himself to hit Jayden in the face. And although it was obvious that such behavior could not be justified, Ben managed to convince the girl that she was to blame herself and deserved it. Jayden's family saw that their daughter and sister was in a toxic relationship with a very dangerous person. Her mother and father were worried about her, tried to get through, but the girl found herself in a state of constant break between family and her beloved. Infatuation clouded her mind, and again she chose Ben. Gradually, his behavior became more and more inadequate and unpredictable. So, after one of the quarrels with Jayden, he caught a neighbor's cat and brutally killed it by cutting off its head. With this act, Ben wanted to take revenge on the girl, so he threw the head of the innocent animal into her bed. Jayden was shocked and horrified by this turn of events. But even after that, Ben managed to confuse her and make her doubt the reality of what happened. Ben masterfully played the role of a lover, but behind his charming smile hid the soul of a real sadist. Ben did not stop at threats to deal with Jayden's pet. He went even further, stating that he could just as easily take the life of the girl herself and her entire family. Young Parkinson, due to her small life experience, simply could not see signs of a serious mental disorder in such behavior. And Ben, meanwhile, continued to masterfully manipulate the inexperienced teenage girl. To prove the seriousness of his intentions, once, when Jayden again tried to get out of his total control, the young man brutally dealt with her own cat. The most terrible thing was that at that moment, the animal was pregnant. This horrific event became the last straw for Jayden. She finally became convinced that her chosen one was an extremely dangerous person. But the girl was completely at a loss. She simply did not know how to solve this problem and end the relationship without catastrophic consequences. Ben kept her close to him, using all possible methods of influence. Now threats were added to his arsenal, which became a powerful lever of pressure on the teenager's psyche. In fact, at that time, Ben had long been in the field of view of law enforcement officers. The guy's life was quite difficult and full of criminal adventures. For a long time, he was engaged in petty crimes, for which he repeatedly got into the police station. Ben was brought up in a foster family, where he had extremely tense relations with his parents. The man who replaced his own father suffered from alcoholism, and more than once subjected the boy to brutal violence in childhood. Ben grew up in an atmosphere of constant fear, endless humiliation and beatings, which undoubtedly left its mark on his fragile child's psyche. Ben's relatives also very quickly realized that their boy was a considerable danger to those around him. So once, when his mother began to express her dissatisfaction with his behavior, because of which he again got into trouble with the law, Ben suddenly exploded in anger. In a fit of mad rage, the young man grabbed a screwdriver and began to threaten his own mother with physical violence. The woman was shocked and frightened by the realization that a juvenile maniac was living in her house. But despite this, she still decided not to write a statement to the police for the time being, but to try to help her son cope with his problems on her own. As a result, instead of prison, the boy ended up at a psychiatric clinic, where a rather revealing conversation took place with one of the doctors. It is worth noting that at the time of that visit, Ben was still in school. However, instead of topics typical for his age, the young man began to talk with the medic about how to commit the perfect murder, then get rid of the body, and at the same time remain unpunished. It's even scary to imagine that the boy was barely 13 at the time. The words of the young patient greatly interested the psychiatrist. He began to question Ben, trying to understand the way he thinks. The doctor hoped that such frankness would help to better understand the boy's diagnosis. But Ben, it seemed, was only too happy to share his ideas. He willingly told that, in his opinion, the best place to hide a body is a freshly dug grave. Like, bury the dead man imperceptibly for yourself and live in peace. There, for sure, no one will guess to look. When Jayden's parents learned about all these alarming facts, they firmly decided to put an end to their daughter's relationship with this dangerous scumbag, who already had the cold-blooded murder of pets on his account. At that time, Ben was already practically openly mocking the defenseless girl. It was clear to the naked eye that Jayden was in an extremely depressed emotional state. Every time she was left alone, the schoolgirl would cry bitterly. She felt helpless, driven into a corner. She saw no way out of this unhealthy relationship, and fervently wished that her tormentor would just disappear from her life forever. In turn, Ben tried to isolate Jayden even from her own family, seeking to completely control absolutely all areas of the young lover's life. When verbal methods of influence did not work, he did not hesitate to resort to outright physical violence. Jayden found herself trapped by a masterful manipulator, feeling completely helpless, but continued to obey his will. The situation only worsened with each passing day. Under pressure from Ben, the girl began to steal things from her own home. The guy, who did not have a permanent job and could not earn money on his own, forced his girlfriend to commit a crime. He convinced Jayden to secretly take various things out of the house, sell them, and give him all the proceeds. Using manipulation and threats, Ben forced Jayden to constantly lie to her relatives. When the family finally noticed the disappearance of many things and exposed the girl, a serious conflict broke out in the house. Relations with loved ones deteriorated significantly, but Jayden did not dare to tell the real reason for her behavior, because she was afraid of Ben's anger. Eventually, the situation escalated to the point that the girl decided to run away from her father's house. Unfortunately, the only place she could move to was her boyfriend's house. At that time, Ben was living with his cousin, but just a few weeks after Jayden moved in, the cousin moved out. Later, the girl recalled with what incredible cruelty Ben treated her during that period. Beatings became a kind of daily ritual for him. At a certain time, he would take Jayden to the bathroom, brutally beat her, and then lock her up there for several hours. The 16-year-old girl found herself in a hopeless situation and simply did not know what to do next. She did not dare to return home because her relatives had caught her stealing. In addition, Ben threatened that if she left him, he would destroy her entire family. From now on, Ben controlled literally every step of his girl. He constantly humiliated her, inflicted physical pain, even pulled out her hair, which dealt a crushing blow to Jayden's self-esteem. The guy was jealous of her of every passerby, cruelly punishing her even for an accidental glance in the direction of another person. At the same time, he himself repeatedly cheated on Jayden, even had a relationship with his brother's girl, which clearly indicates the extremely low moral qualities of this person. Despite the constant manifestations of cruelty, Jayden continued to maintain this toxic relationship. She lived in constant fear that Ben would really carry out his threats and brutally deal with her entire family. Meanwhile, his control over the girl only intensified. It got to the point that when he woke up in the morning, Ben would first lock Jayden in the room and only then go about his business or have fun. For any action, even the smallest, the girl had to get his permission. Of course, under such conditions, she could not study normally. Her whole life was being destroyed before her eyes. But a blind feeling for the manipulator and all-consuming fear clouded her mind, not allowing her to adequately assess reality. Each new day brought Jayden new suffering, but the most terrible test was yet to come. Beatings became an integral part of Jayden's life. They occurred with horrifying regularity. Ben did not shy away from any methods of violence. He strangled the girl, dealt blows with his fists, bit, threw her to the floor, and brutally pushed her with his feet. 2 years had passed since the beginning of this toxic relationship, and Jayden's life had turned into a real hell. But suddenly, a ray of hope appeared in this darkness. Jayden's mother, realizing the full seriousness of the situation, decided to take her daughter to herself at all costs. She made every effort to calm the girl down and force her to completely sever all ties with the abuser. But Jayden, who always showed a rebellious character in communicating with her relatives, perceived her mother's persuasion extremely hostilely. Just a few days passed, and she returned to her tormentor again. The girl became so emotionally dependent on this monster that even under the threat of reprisals against her family, she did not dare to leave him, although deep down she desperately wanted to. Of course, no positive changes occurred. The moral and physical violence only gained momentum. And finally, in November 2013, Jayden took a desperate step to break this destructive relationship once and for all. However, fear for the safety of loved ones did not allow her to return home. Instead, the girl decided to hide in a homeless shelter. Undoubtedly, this is not the best choice for a minor, but Jayden sincerely believed that the staff of the institution would be able to provide her with the necessary help and protection, and most importantly, her ex-boyfriend would not be able to find her there. Unfortunately, these hopes turned out to be in vain. Ben tracked down Jayden pretty quickly. He regularly visited the shelter, continuing to impose his will on the girl. It came to the point of absurdity. Ben even forbade her to visit the toilet. At first, Jayden obeyed this humiliating order, but later she dared to violate it. In the shelter, the girl had the opportunity to communicate with the staff. Experienced employees opened her eyes to the fact that she was in an extremely dangerous and destructive dependence on an abuser guy, a masterful manipulator. They convinced Jayden that such a toxic environment created by Ben could not be considered normal under any circumstances. Gradually, the girl came to the realization that she was not obliged to follow all the orders and whims of her ex to obey his cruel rules. For the first time in a long time, Jayden had a real opportunity to correct the mistakes of the past. Hope for a happy future settled in her heart again. But at the same time, Ben began to notice that his ex-girlfriend was gradually getting out of control. This ignited a furious anger and thirst for revenge in him. The last straw was the realization that Jayden had found herself a new boyfriend. Without wasting time, Ben began to send her threats, trying to restore his control and return the girl to the usual framework of a toxic relationship. He even managed to gradually scare away Jayden's new chosen one, who, frightened by the seriousness of the threats, decided not to take risks and not mess with a dangerous rival. But Ben was not going to stop there. He decided to deal a crushing blow to the reputation of his former girlfriend by publishing her intimate photos and videos on the internet, which he took without the girl's consent throughout the entire period of their relationship. It turned out that he had accumulated a whole collection of such materials. Ben's true goal was to drive Jayden to despair and push her to commit suicide. Unfortunately, at that time, the legislation did not provide for any responsibility for the publication of other people's intimate materials. Only from 2015, such actions began to qualify as crimes on sexual grounds, for which a punishment of 2 years in prison was provided. So in 2013, when the described events took place, Ben actually remained out of reach for justice. Even nowadays, it is quite difficult to prove guilt in such cases, and in the complete absence of a legislative framework, it seemed completely impossible. Jayden could only watch helplessly as the offender destroyed her reputation, but the biggest shock was waiting for the girl ahead. Despite all the bullying, she did not succumb to despair and did not take her own life. However, a few weeks after breaking up with Ben, Jayden found out about her pregnancy. The girl did not even think about getting rid of the child. On the contrary, she hoped that the appearance of a common baby would help resolve all conflicts, awaken the best feelings in Ben's heart, and return their relationship to a normal course. It seemed that motherhood could soften Ben's heart. But this illusion very quickly shattered to smithereens. Despite all the suffering and humiliation that Jayden had to endure, she could not forget about the problems in her own family caused by her parents' divorce. The girl sincerely believed that every child deserves the love and care of both parents. That is why on December 3, 2013, she dared to call Ben to inform him about her delicate situation and name him the father of the unborn baby. It is worth noting that for this conversation, Jayden had to use someone else's phone, because Ben had taken her mobile from her and had not returned it. Upon hearing the news of the pregnancy, the guy refused to believe his ex-girlfriend. Jayden desperately tried to convince him that she had not been intimate with anyone else, so she could not get pregnant by someone else. But all her arguments ran into a wall of distrust. Ben stubbornly accused the girl of trying to lure him into a trap by imposing someone else's child on him. Ben's reaction seemed strange at the very least, because up to that point, he himself had been actively stalking his former lover. Probably the guy once again tried to make Jayden feel guilty and thus control her emotions and decisions. Be that as it may, as a result of this tense conversation, the young people agreed on a personal meeting in order to discuss everything in detail. The day before, Jayden met with her mother and told her about her pregnancy. The girl assured her mother that she finally felt free and happy because Ben allegedly left her alone. The woman was sincerely happy about her daughter's decision because she had long tried to convince her to break off this toxic relationship, realizing how dangerous Ben could be. That day, mother and daughter talked for a long time about Jayden's current life and her plans for the future. They even agreed to go to the store together in the near future to buy the necessary things for the unborn child. But by the irony of fate, Jayden never told her mother about the horrific details of her ex-boyfriend's behavior and the planned meeting with him. The fact is that the girl was afraid of Ben's reaction. She did not want to endanger her mother, knowing about his aggressive nature. Around 3:30 p.m., 17-year-old Jayden went to meet with Ben, full of hopes and expectations. This meeting was supposed to be decisive. The girl's future life and that of her unborn child depended on it. The former lovers met at Oxford Station, getting caught on CCTV cameras. Further, Ben and Jayden's path led to the countryside near Didcot. The trusting girl believed the guy's assurances that they were heading for a picturesque picnic, where they could talk frankly in an atmosphere of peace and unity with nature. Jayden was last seen alive at Didcot Station. This moment was also recorded by CCTV cameras. From the very beginning of this fatal meeting, Ben's behavior seemed arrogant and rude. He continued to accuse Jayden of lying about her pregnancy, rejecting any of the girl's attempts to prove her case. Eventually, the young people reached a remote field, which, in Ben's opinion, was supposed to be the ideal place for a frank conversation. In fact, the guy brought Jayden here for a completely different purpose. Carefully looking around and making sure that they were left alone, Ben led Jayden to an old abandoned barn. Suspecting nothing, the girl obediently went inside, not even suspecting her companion's true intentions. No one could believe what Ben was capable of. His act forever changed the course of this story. Once in the barn, Ben abruptly changed his behavior, filled with unrestrained aggression. He began to furiously accuse Jayden of betrayal, claiming that the pregnancy was an insidious result of her infidelity. The guy's rage rapidly increased, reaching its apogee in a matter of minutes. Finally, he pounced on the defenseless girl who had so recklessly trusted him. With several powerful blows, Ben knocked Jayden off her feet. She fell to the ground, and at that moment the enraged sadist pounced on her, grabbing her throat with his hands. He squeezed her neck with inhuman strength, while the poor girl desperately tried to break free from this deadly grip. But it was in vain. Jayden gradually lost strength, no longer showing signs of life. Finally releasing her exhausted body, Ben took out his mobile phone and, using the screen, checked whether his victim was still breathing. Making sure that the girl was dead, he finally calmed down. The goal was achieved. During the subsequent investigation, forensic experts were unable to reliably confirm that Jayden was indeed pregnant at the time of the murder. There remained a possibility that the pregnancy test could have been false, or the girl deliberately deceived Ben, hoping in this way to soften his attitude towards her and establish a relationship. Be that as it may, it was no longer possible for anyone to find out the truth. Now Ben faced the urgent need to get rid of the body. Finally, he found himself in a situation that he had long dreamed of in his perverted fantasies, to commit the perfect murder and get away with it. But in a fit of reprisal against Jayden, he did not think about the tools with which he could cover up the traces of the crime. Realizing that he did not even have a shovel at hand, Ben decided to return home for the necessary tools. The footage from the CCTV cameras at the railway station clearly shows how the killer returns alone from the fields and boards a train. Only a few days later, he again visited the crime scene, but this time not alone, but with his younger brother Jake. The boy had barely turned 17. He had an absolutely unblemished reputation. He had never been noticed in connections with the criminal world or any illegal actions. But despite this, the older brother without hesitation made Jake an involuntary accomplice in his terrible deed. It is quite likely that the boy simply did not dare to refuse Ben, even realizing the dubiousness of his request. Arriving at the place, Ben imperiously ordered Jake to dig a deep hole near the barn where the murder took place. The boy obediently followed the order, perhaps realizing that disobedience could cost him his health or even his life. When Jake asked about the purpose of the pit, Ben lied that he intended to hide a weapon there. Of course, this explanation did not sound as creepy as the need to hide the body of a murdered girl. However, despite his pretended gullibility, the younger brother almost immediately sensed something was wrong, and yet he decided to remain silent and continued to dig. The pit was ready, and Ben, hastily saying goodbye to his brother, threw Jayden's bloody body into it, and then quickly covered it with earth. But even with that, the eerie story did not end. In Ben's mind, darkened by painful fantasies, another perverse plan ripened. On December 9th, 6 days after the murder, he returned to the pit and dug up the already half-decomposed body of his ex-girlfriend. Ben brought an old grandmother's suitcase with him, in which he was going to pack the remains of the unfortunate Jayden. With disgusting negligence, he shoved the body into the suitcase, giving it an unnaturally hunched pose. After that, around 1 a.m, Ben stopped a taxi. The driver, seeing a strange young man with a huge suitcase standing on the side of the road in the middle of the night, all covered in mud and with disheveled hair, for some reason did not suspect anything wrong. He obediently drove the client to the nearest church, on the territory of which there was an old cemetery. As it turned out later, it was there that Ben had prepared a grave for his victim in advance. The most impressive fact was that the murderer's younger brother was involved in digging this grave. This time, Ben lied to Jake that he was going to bury some dead animal in the cemetery. The investigation suggested that the only reason for such tacit complicity of the boy in his brother's crimes was the incredible fear of taking the place of one of the victims. It's hard to believe, but Ben even made up a whole story to justify his actions with hiding the body. He claimed that he considered it unworthy to bury his ex-lover somewhere in a field, like some dead animal. Therefore, he allegedly decided to bury her in a human way, in a cemetery, in the grave of someone close. Meanwhile, Jayden's relatives were alarmed because the girl had disappeared without a trace. She did not answer calls, ignored all messages. The mother of the unfortunate girl tried to find her through friends, checked the shelter where she lived, but all attempts were in vain. Jayden's phone remained with Ben, who later simply sold the device, completely depriving the missing girl's relatives of the opportunity to contact her. On December 4th, 2013, the Parkinson family finally turned to the police with a statement about Jayden's disappearance. Law enforcement officers immediately began an investigation. They interviewed the girl's relatives and acquaintances, posted leaflets with her photographs, and involved volunteers in the search operation. About 100 police officers were involved in these searches. They combed the area, inspected the territory from the air, reviewed CCTV footage throughout the city. And at some point, the first alarming signs began to appear, which indicated the involvement of the girl's ex-boyfriend in her disappearance. As a result, all the evidence led the investigators to the doorstep of Ben's house. Based on the information gathered, the police accused the young man of kidnapping Jayden. However, from the very beginning, he began to deny that he had seen the girl on the day of her disappearance. Of course, the investigators did not believe a single word of his, because they had heard a lot of evidence about how Ben communicated and behaved with Jayden shortly before her disappearance, and the CCTV footage contradicted his words. Trying to convince the police of his non-involvement, Ben began to get angry, shout, and even allowed himself veiled threats against law enforcement officers. It seemed that the guy did not realize at all how serious the situation was and with whom he was talking. During interrogations, the suspect behaved extremely arrogantly and aggressively, which only increased the suspicions of detectives. They felt that Ben was clearly hiding something. During interrogations, the young man tried to convince the investigation that he had parted with Jayden long ago, that she no longer interested him, and therefore he had no idea where she could be. But since the girl had disappeared more than a week ago, the police began to consider the worst-case scenario. Jayden was no longer alive. The progress of the investigation was actively covered in the media, which eventually bore fruit. A taxi driver who had given Ben a ride with a huge suitcase to the church cemetery that fateful night contacted the police. The man recognized the main suspect and wanted to share his memories of those events. Having received this information, the investigators, together with the dog handlers, went to inspect the place indicated by the taxi driver. Soon, in an old barn near the church, a suitcase was found that exactly matched the description of the one that Ben was carrying in a taxi. In parallel, there was a shift in the conversation with the suspect's brother. Jake admitted that his older brother had twice forced him to dig holes in suspicious places, although he did not explain what for. All these facts made it possible on December 19th, on the eve of Christmas, to find the body of the missing girl. This day forever darkened the life of the Parkinson family. The autopsy of Jayden's body, conducted by a forensic expert, showed that the cause of the girl's death was strangulation. On her face and head, relatively large bruises were found, the nature of which indicated strong blows with a fist or foot. The official identification of the deceased was carried out by her mother, who was forced to experience the worst thing that can happen to parents, to bury her own child. While awaiting court hearings, Ben was in custody. It was during this period that he wrote a confession to the crime he had committed. However, the main line of his defense was the statement that he could not be held responsible for the murder because of his alleged mental illness. Obviously, in this way, the suspect hoped to avoid punishment. Psychiatric examinations were appointed, which refuted his statements. According to experts, at the time of the murder, the young man was fully aware of his actions. Ben was charged not only with premeditated murder, but also with desecrating the body of the deceased. His lawyer insisted that the defendant had no criminal intent when he went with his ex-girlfriend to a remote countryside. They allegedly just planned to talk. Also, the defense denied the facts of Ben's cruel treatment of Jayden. However, during the investigation, many witnesses were found who revealed the full depth of the accused's cruelty towards the deceased. About 10 people from Jayden's circle confirmed that they had repeatedly seen traces of beatings on the girl's body, noticed striking changes in her behavior under the influence of Ben's psychological manipulations. But the most chilling details were revealed in their conclusions by forensic experts. Experts were convinced that the accused strangled his victim at least 3 times, each time bringing her to her senses. Obviously, he did it for the sake of perverted pleasure. Throughout the trial, the defendant showed no signs of remorse. He could suddenly laugh, make an inappropriate joke, and then suddenly get angry and start insulting everyone present. Once Ben even threatened the prosecutor with physical violence. Of course, such behavior only worsened his position and convinced the jury of the absolute inadequacy of the accused. After the court hearings were over, the jurors gathered for a meeting to make a verdict. The discussion lasted about 20 hours. As a result, 11 out of 12 members of the panel found Ben guilty of premeditated murder. When the judge was about to announce the verdict, the convicted man threw a real tantrum. He screamed, writhed in convulsions, and accused Jayden of conspiring against him. Despite all this, Ben believed that he deserved the death penalty. He said that he sees the murdered girl in his dreams. But since 2003, in the United Kingdom, the highest measure of punishment is life imprisonment. The judge emphasized that the convicted person poses a considerable danger to society. Ben was sentenced to the maximum penalty, life imprisonment with the right to review the sentence no earlier than after 20 years. After the end of the process over Jayden's killer, problems began with his younger brother. Jake tried for a long time to prove that he did not directly participate in the murder and helped to get rid of the body against his will. Eventually, he managed to convince the jury that he had become a victim of psychological pressure from his older brother and had been in fear the whole time. He was afraid that Ben would throw him into one of those pits. Jayden Parkinson's relatives expressed the hope that her killer will never be released, because he is an extremely dangerous person. The girl's mother is convinced that the problem of domestic violence should be discussed from school, so that young girls are aware of and beware of any manifestations of abuse in relationships, Do not get involved with guys who are prone to manipulation and aggression.
My name is Thomas Matthew Crooks. I hate Republicans, I hate Trump, and guess what? You got the wrong guy.
The July day of 2024 will forever be etched in the memory of Americans as one of the most dramatic and alarming moments in the country's history. What seemed like a routine pre-election rally in Butler County, Pennsylvania, turned into a bloody arena when shots rang out, aimed at former U.S. President Donald Trump. America froze in shock upon learning about the audacious assassination attempt on the life of the politician, who was once again fighting for the Republican Party's presidential nomination. Footage of Trump falling on stage, surrounded by scrambling security guards and terrified spectators, circulated across all TV channels and social media. The country held its breath, waiting for news about the ex-president's condition and trying to comprehend the shooter's motives. As it turned out, the perpetrator, armed with a rifle, had taken a position on the roof of a nearby building and opened fire on the crowd. His shots not only wounded Trump, but also took the life of one spectator and left 2 others seriously injured. Thanks to the swift reaction of the security service, the attacker was quickly neutralized, but it was already too late to prevent the tragedy. This shocking event instantly shook American society to its core, exposing deep political and social divisions. Politicians from both camps put aside their quarrels and unanimously condemned the violence, calling for unity in the face of the threat of extremism. Against the backdrop of nationwide outrage and mourning for the fallen, a massive investigation was launched to identify the shooter and his possible connections. Soon, disturbing facts surfaced about the suspect, a 20-year-old resident of Pennsylvania. Although his specific motives remained a mystery, data about his ambiguous past and potential psychological issues raised more questions than answers. Interviews with relatives, neighbors, and school friends painted a contradictory portrait of a young man who strangely combined introversion and interest in politics, intelligence, and eccentricities. The assassination attempt on Trump exposed painful problems that had been swept under the rug for years: growing hostility between political forces, radicalization of marginal elements, and cracks in the security system. I have gathered absolutely all the information and conducted a documentary investigation about this. Let's start with the main character of this video. Thomas Matthew Crooks was born on September 20th, 2003, in the cozy suburb of Pittsburgh, Bethel Park, Pennsylvania. He was a typical representative of the American middle class: neat houses, trimmed lawns, and friendly smiles from neighbors. It would seem that it is in such places that those who embody the promise of the American dream are born and raised. But sometimes, even in the calmest waters, there can be hidden undercurrents. Thomas's parents, Matthew and Jennifer Crooks, worked as social workers. Despite sharing the same profession, the couple had somewhat different political preferences. According to voter records, Matthew registered as a libertarian, while Jennifer registered as a Democrat. However, little Thomas was hardly concerned about this. He grew up as an inquisitive and quiet boy, interested in ordinary children's entertainment. Everything changed when Thomas went to Bethel Park High School. Despite his decent academic performance, he became the object of ridicule and bullying by his peers. He didn't hang out with any particular group, so I guess he always had a target on his back, recalled one of Crooks' classmates, Jason Kohler. Perhaps it was his desire to prove his coolness that led Thomas to try out for the school shooting team. But due to his poor aim, he was rejected. Despite the unpleasantness in communicating with peers, Crooks found solace in his favorite activities. He was passionate about chess, video games, and programming. It was in the field of computer science that Thomas achieved his first serious success. In 2022, he received the Star Award from the National Math and Science Initiative, which was accompanied by a $500 grant. However, a year before that, cardinal changes occurred in the life of Crooks, as well as millions of other American school children. The COVID-19 pandemic forced schools to switch to an online learning format. And if previously Thomas was simply not noticed, now he almost dissolved into the digital space. One of his classmates recalled how rarely she saw him in online classes during their senior years. Instead, according to her, Crooks found company among students with conservative views, those who were not ashamed to wear hats with Trump symbols. Outwardly, Thomas remained a retro nerd, but with something else brewing in his soul. After graduating from high school in 2022, Crooks enrolled in the local community college. This decision was not surprising. The institution was located nearby, and provided an opportunity to obtain a decent technical education. Just 2 years later, in May 2024, Thomas earned an associate's degree in engineering. At the same time, he worked part-time at a nursing home, performing the duties of a dietitian. The management of the facility characterized him as a conscientious employee, and colleagues called him the nicest guy, who sincerely cared about the elderly. Back in January 2021, at the age of 17, Crooks made a $15 donation to the Progressive Turnout Project, a committee that sympathized with the Democrats. And in the fall, having barely reached the age of majority, he registered as a Republican voter. However, according to officials, Thomas exercised his right to vote only once, in the 2022 midterm elections. Nothing in Crooks' life seemed to portend trouble. At least, that was the impression he made on acquaintances. A quiet, reserved person who values peace and the opportunity to do his own thing. Even when, after the tragedy of July 13, 2024, Thomas's father was asked about his son, he confusedly replied to journalists that he was trying to figure out what was happening. And this is what happened. On that July day, Thomas Crooks got into his car and drove almost an hour from Bethel Park to Butler County. There, in a small town, Donald Trump was scheduled to deliver his campaign speech. It is unknown whether Crooks planned to commit the assassination right away, or perhaps wanted to first hear the politician's words and decide something for himself. But just a few minutes after the start of the rally, Thomas reached the roof of a neighboring building, took out the rifle that his father had purchased, and opened fire. Several bullets hit Trump in the right ear, splattering his suit with blood. Other shots took the life of 50-year-old spectator Corey Comparatore and seriously injured 2 other men. And then a sniper from the Secret Service hit Crooks. It was all over in less than 2 minutes. During searches of Thomas's residence and car, explosive materials were found, evidence of careful preparation that clashed with the carelessness and disguise and escape from the crime scene, as if the assassination attempt was something like a fatal and irresistible mission for Crooks. Now, the main question that investigators, journalists, politicians, and ordinary Americans are repeating is why? What pushed this young man from a working-class suburb onto the path of political terror? From which websites did he draw his ideas? With whom did he communicate in closed chats? And how long did he nurture his eerie plan? While Trump was recovering from his injury, his supporters and opponents tried to make sense of the causes and consequences of the assassination attempt. One of the key questions that divided commentators: could Trump himself somehow take advantage of this tragedy for his own interests? Butler County, where the assassination attempt took place, is located in western Pennsylvania, a region that traditionally voted for Democrats, but has noticeably shifted to the right in recent years. In 2016, Trump defeated Hillary Clinton here, receiving 66% of the vote. But in 2020, his lead over Joe Biden was only 8%. Thus, for Republicans, this was one of those counties where it was necessary to restore and consolidate their influence on the eve of the elections. And here, as if according to an evil script, an attempt is made on Trump's life. Naturally, conspiratorial notes began to sound in the comments of his supporters, like, isn't it too convenient for the Democrats that their main competitor was nearly eliminated in such an electorally important region? On the right conservative Fox News channel, hosts Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity hinted that more influential figures could be behind Crooks. And Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene directly stated on Twitter that the assassination attempt on President Trump is an assassination attempt on all of America, from the dirty hands of the deep state. From the Democratic camp, accusations immediately rang out that the Republicans were engaging in victim blaming and playing to the public. Congressman Adam Schiff noted in an interview with CNN that, instead of seeking the truth, our opponents are once again resorting to conspiracy theories that only fuel hatred and deepen the divide. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi urged not to speculate on the tragedy, but to wait for the results of the investigation. However, in parallel with the official reaction, rumors of a different kind began to spread on social networks. Anonymous users of Twitter and Reddit put forward assumptions that the assassination attempt could have been staged by Trump himself or his team. Like, at a time when the ex-president's rating began to sag, he desperately needed a jockey whip. Moreover, Thomas Crooks, a convinced Republican who shot like a real pro, too closely resembled the perfect criminal. Of course, such accusations could seem far-fetched, but they fell on fertile ground. After all, after Joe Biden's victory in 2020, Many Democratic supporters were convinced that Trump would not simply give up and would come up with some kind of trap. So why not play the wounded but not defeated card, especially against the backdrop of an economic downturn and a loss of points in the ratings? Another line of commentary concerned the connection between the assassination attempt and Trump's own rhetoric. Critics of the ex-president, particularly from the Never Trumpers circle, pointed out how often he resorted to belligerent appeals at his rallies, like talk of fighting to the end, saving America from enemies, and the Second Amendment could inspire mentally unstable people to violence. If you sow the wind, you will inevitably reap the whirlwind, noted former House Speaker Republican Paul Ryan. Public opinion polls showed that Trump did receive some sympathy from voters. His personal approval rating rose by 7 percentage points. At the same time, most respondents did not believe that the Democrats were somehow involved in organizing the assassination attempt. Those surveyed also did not see a direct connection between Trump's rhetoric and the behavior of Thomas Crooks. However, these figures hardly indicated a fundamental shift in the mood of the electorate. Firstly, many Americans traditionally sympathize with politicians who have survived an assassination attempt. This was the case with Reagan and Ford. Secondly, at the time of the survey, everyone was still under the impression of the tragedy and reacted more emotionally. After all, the experience of Trump's previous campaigns showed that it was extremely difficult for him to turn situational support into long-term electoral loyalty. So despite the ex-president's attempts to present himself as almost a martyr, this image was unlikely to work in the long run. After all, the key issues that most worried voters remained economic difficulties, healthcare, and racial justice. And it was the position of the candidates on these issues that was supposed to determine the outcome of the elections, not unsubstantiated accusations or appeals to emotions. As much as Team Trump tried to play the July 13th card, it was unlikely to become a Trump card. Because in the end, Americans choose a president not out of pity, but out of hope for a better future. And much more depended on whether Trump could offer them a convincing path to this future than on all the conspiracy theories combined. This event called into question the effectiveness of the work of the U.S. Secret Service. After all, the key task of this elite unit is to ensure the safety of the president, senior officials, and presidential candidates. So when it became known that the shooter Thomas Crooks managed to wound Trump while being outside the security perimeter, many had uncomfortable questions. Why didn't the Secret Service neutralize the attacker before he managed to take shots? How could an armed sniper inconspicuously make his way to the roof of a neighboring building? And most importantly, are the rumors true that spectators noticed a suspicious person and tried to warn law enforcement, but they ignored the signal? These questions became the focus of media and public attention in the days following the assassination attempt. The first alarm was raised by a Twitter user with the handle @BenShepard11. In his post, published 2 hours after the shooting, he claimed, "I was at the rally and saw with my own eyes how some man was pointing at the roof and shouting something to the police, but they just waved him off." This tweet quickly went viral, garnering over 100,000 retweets and likes. And although there was no evidence of @BenShepard11's words, they fueled a wave of outrage on social networks. Soon the story was picked up by more authoritative sources as well. For example, Emily Watson, a journalist for the local newspaper Butler Eagle, wrote in her column, "Several rally participants told me that they noticed suspicious activity on the roof even before the shooting started. They allegedly turned to Secret Service employees, but they did not react. If this information is confirmed, then this is a serious breach in the security system." Watson's article caused a wide resonance and forced officials to come out of the shadows. At an emergency press briefing, Secret Service spokesman James Murray assured, "We are carefully examining all reports of possible oversights in the work of our agents during the rally in Butler. At the moment, we have no evidence that employees ignored a direct indication of a threat, but we will continue the investigation and hold accountable everyone who could have made a mistake." However, these assurances did not convince many skeptics. Republican Congressman Dan Crenshaw stated on Fox News, "I have great respect for the Secret Service, but in this case, they clearly did not work well enough. If people warned about a sniper on the roof and the agents did nothing, it is unacceptable. We need to find out how this could have happened and who is responsible for it." Another Congresswoman, Democrat Katie Porter, called for an independent investigation of the incident. "An assassination attempt on the president is a matter of national security. and Congress should ensure that the investigation is impartial and transparent. Meanwhile, journalists continued to gather eyewitness accounts. CNN reporter Danielle Griffin tracked down the man who allegedly warned law enforcement about the sniper. He turned out to be 28-year-old Ethan Smith, who came to Trump's rally from a neighboring county. In an interview, Smith said, "About 10 minutes before the shooting started, I noticed the silhouette of a person with a gun on the roof. At first, I thought it was a police sniper, but something seemed strange to me. So I went up to 2 secret agents and told them about it. But they just shrugged their shoulders and replied something like, 'We are monitoring the situation, don't worry.' I didn't insist, because I decided that they knew their job. And then the shooting started." Smith's story added mystery to the whole situation and gave rise to a new wave of questions. Why did experienced Secret Service agents not take the spectators' warning seriously? Were they so overconfident that they ignored a potential threat? Or maybe no one actually told them anything, and this whole story is a fiction or a misunderstanding. All these versions were actively discussed in the media and social networks. Ultimately, the question of the Secret Service's role in the assassination attempt on Trump remained unanswered. The veil of secrecy that shrouded the events of July 13th gave rise to many versions and assumptions, from quite plausible to downright fantastic. However, the blame for the tragedy in Butler lies not only with the Secret Service. As the investigation shows, the incident was caused by a combination of many factors, from holes in the security system to the psychological instability of the criminal himself. And in order to prevent the recurrence of similar assassination attempts, America needs not only to change security protocols, but also to work with the root causes of violence, social tension, polarization, and radicalization. Because in the end, no Secret Service, no matter how perfect, is capable of 100% protecting politicians from the bullets of crazy loners. As by the way, the assassination attempt on Reagan in 1981 and the assassination attempt on Ford in 1975 showed. Therefore, the real protection for democracy is not the number of guards around the candidate, but an atmosphere of respect, trust, and common sense in society. The news of the assassination attempt on Donald Trump on July 13, 2024, caught President Joe Biden during a working trip to Massachusetts. When aides informed him about the incident, Biden immediately interrupted all scheduled events and contacted FBI Director Christopher Wray and Secret Service Chief Kimberly Channing. According to eyewitnesses, the president was shocked and agitated, but tried to maintain calm and control over the situation. Just an hour after the assassination attempt, Biden made an emergency statement to the press. Standing behind a podium with the presidential seal, he condemned the terrible act of violence and expressed sympathy to the Trump family and all those affected. At this difficult moment, we are all Americans, regardless of party affiliation or political views. We must unite in prayer for President Trump's recovery and in resolute condemnation of those who sow hatred and discord, Biden stressed. At the same time, the president urged to wait for the results of the official investigation and not to draw premature conclusions. Now is not the time for speculation and accusations. We must trust the professionals from the FBI and the Secret Service, who will certainly find out all the circumstances of this incident. And our task is to maintain unity, calm, and faith in the strength of our democracy, he said. Biden's reaction to the assassination attempt generally received positive feedback from the political establishment and the media. Most commentators noted Biden's presidential tone and statesman-like position. Some even drew parallels with Ronald Reagan's reaction to his own assassination attempt in 1981. They say both leaders showed strength of spirit and a desire to unite the nation. However, not everyone was delighted with the president's words. Some of Trump's supporters accused Biden of hypocrisy and crocodile tears. They say the current president and his administration have been demonizing Trump for years, and now they suddenly started talking about unity. The reaction of ultra-right commentators like Alex Jones and Rush Limbaugh was especially harsh. They hinted that the deep state could be behind the assassination attempt, seeking to remove Trump from the political arena. However, despite these isolated attacks, most Americans positively assessed Biden's reaction to the tragedy. According to an Ipsos survey conducted on July 15th, 67% of respondents positively assessed the president's statement, and 71% agreed that now is not the time for political speculation. At the same time, Biden's job approval rating rose slightly, from 44% to 48%. It seems that against the backdrop of a national tragedy, Americans wanted to see in their leader primarily a moral authority and a symbol of unity. The day after the assassination attempt, Biden personally called Melania Trump to express support and offer any necessary assistance. He also canceled several campaign events to, in his words, not distract from President Trump's recovery. These steps were positively received even by some Republicans. In particular, Senator Mitt Romney noted that Biden acted like a true statesman, rising above partisan squabbles. However, critical notes were also heard in some places. Some believe that Biden overdid it with his empathy for Trump. They say, one should not forget that we are talking about a politician who has been poisoning American politics with lies and hatred for years. Instead of expounding on unity, the president should have clearly condemned the atmosphere of discord and confrontation that Trump created. Otherwise, we risk legitimizing Trumpism against the backdrop of a national tragedy. Michelle Goldberg, a columnist for the New York Times, wrote. However, the most resonant was the conspiracy theory voiced on Fox News by the famous host Tucker Carlson. He suggested that Biden himself, or someone from his inner circle, could be behind the assassination attempt on Trump. Like, the elimination of the main competitor on the eve of the elections would be very beneficial for the incumbent president. Carlson did not provide any evidence for his words, but called for an independent investigation of the possible links between the Biden administration and the shooter Thomas Crooks. This statement caused outrage in the White House and among Democrats in Congress. Presidential spokeswoman Karine Jean-Pierre called Carlson's words irresponsible, vile, and unrelated to reality. And House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi said that Tucker Carlson and Fox News must immediately apologize for their vile insinuations that offend not only President Biden, but the entire institution of the presidency. However, Carlson was in no hurry to apologize. Instead, he continued to peddle the theme of conspiracy around the assassination attempt, involving marginal experts and anonymous sources in the special services in his shows. His rhetoric was picked up by other conservative media and politicians. In particular, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene said that she would not be surprised if someone very close to Joe Biden was behind the assassination attempt on Trump. And former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani called the current president's behavior suspicious and urged the Attorney General to take a close look at his connections. Biden himself consistently avoided commenting on rumors about his involvement in the assassination attempt, calling them nonsense and an insult to all Americans. At the same time, his team actively worked to capitalize on the wave of sympathy and national unity around the tragedy. In particular, the creation of a special interagency committee to counter political extremism and violence was announced. Biden also initiated a series of meetings with congressional leaders and civic activists to discuss ways to reduce polarization and tension in society. However, the main lesson that Biden and all of America should have learned from the July 13th assassination attempt is not PR techniques, but a crisis of values. Because as long as hatred, discord, and conspiracy theories poison the national discourse, no president will be safe, neither physically nor politically. And in order to prevent new tragedies, America needs not just nice words, but deep work on its traumas and divisions. Victims of the assassination attempt, a tragedy that shook America. The assassination attempt on Donald Trump on July 13, 2024, became not only a political, but also a human shock for all of America. After all, as a result of the actions of the shooter Thomas Crooks, one civilian was killed, and 2 others received serious injuries. And although their names were not as well known as the name of the ex-president himself, their stories reminded everyone of the true price of political violence. The victim of the shooting turned out to be 50-year-old Corey Comparatore from the town of Greenville, Pennsylvania. He is survived by his wife Rebecca, with whom he lived in marriage for 28 years and had 2 adult sons. Comparatore was a longtime Trump supporter and specifically came to Butler to personally support his idol. But the cruel irony of fate took his life during the rally on which he had pinned so many hopes. According to relatives and friends, Corey was a sincere, kind, and hardworking person who loved his family, community, and country. He worked as a logistics manager at a local transportation company and was known for his responsibility and honesty. In his free time, Comparatore enjoyed fishing, watching football, and volunteering at church. He was a true patriot who believed in America and conservative values, and although we did not always agree with him in our views, I always respected his integrity and devotion to his family, recalled his cousin Michael. Unfortunately, it was this devotion that brought Comparatore to the Trump rally that fateful day. He was standing in the front rows near the stage when a bullet from Crooks' rifle hit him right in the heart. According to eyewitnesses, Corey died instantly, only managing to shout, "Oh God!" His last words and the blood on his t-shirt with the inscription, "Make America Great Again," became a chilling symbol of how political passions can cut short the most precious thing, human life. This is the last video where 18-year-old Taylor Behl was last seen alive. The residents of the small town were shocked by the event, because only the girl's bones were left. Now I will tell you the details of this terrible case, so that you can protect yourself from encountering such insidious scoundrels like the man you now see on the screen. Be sure to watch to the end to be prepared for such challenges. Taylor Behl, a high school graduate from the small town of Vienna in the state of Virginia, USA, decided to enter Virginia Commonwealth University. This educational institution, located in the state capital of Richmond, was famous for its first-class infrastructure and vibrant nightlife that revolved around the student body. The university, known for its achievements in the field of biotechnology, had about 30,000 students. For Taylor, the university's location was ideal, as it allowed her not to move too far away from her caring mother. Initially, the girl often traveled between the two cities, living for some time in Richmond with close friends of her parents, but later she decided to settle directly on the university campus. On September 5, 2005, Taylor Behl intended to visit one of the local restaurants to have dinner with her friend Ben. After the meal, the student planned to skateboard with him through the city streets at night, and then return to campus. That same morning, Taylor met with Ben to borrow his skateboard for a while, intending to return it in the evening. Around 10 in the evening, after meeting her friend, the girl came to the dormitory. However, her roommate was spending time with her boyfriend and asked Taylor not to disturb them. The girl agreed to leave, taking only her car keys, cell phone, and $40 in cash. Her purse was left in the room. Before leaving, the heroine told her roommate that she would return in a couple of hours. Contrary to her promise, Taylor did not appear in the dormitory either at the specified time or even the next day. The girl stopped communicating, did not respond on social networks, behaved very atypically for herself. Attempts to call her turned out to be futile, and all text messages sent through messengers remained unread. On September 7, 2005, the girl's mother went to the police with a statement about her daughter's disappearance. Law enforcement officers treated this without much enthusiasm, believing that the adult girl had just gone out somewhere and would soon return on her own. After all, students disappear almost every day, but in 99% of cases, such stories end with the favorable return of young people. Guys and girls can disappear for several days or more, spending time at parties with friends. A week had passed since Taylor's disappearance, and the police officers had not found out anything. Under pressure from the missing girl's relatives, the officers finally took the case seriously. They checked Taylor's activity on social networks and on her mobile phone, but found that the girl had completely stopped using them. This convinced law enforcement that the family was telling the truth, that something bad had happened to Taylor. Moreover, all the girl's things, including clothes, cosmetics, money, and a purse, were left in the dorm room. Taylor had never been out for long without these things before. In addition, no transfers or payments were recorded on her bank cards, which finally convinced the detectives of the seriousness of the situation. The police turned to the public for help through the media, but unfortunately this did not yield any results. Soon, Taylor's car was found, a white 1997 Ford Escort. It was parked just a few kilometers from the university campus. Law enforcement decided to put the car under surveillance for at least 12 hours, hoping that the likely criminal would return to it. Unfortunately, this did not happen, so the car was sent for examination. Taylor had no idea that her disappearance would become a real nightmare for the police, and especially for her loved ones. At the initial stage of the investigation, the detectives came across the first alarming find. It turned out that license plates stolen 2 months before the girl's disappearance were installed on Taylor's car. This suggested the involvement of a quick-witted and knowledgeable criminal in the case. As it became known, the numbers were registered in the state of Ohio. Investigators found that they belonged to a former resident of that state who had recently moved to Richmond. The owner of the numbers turned out to be a student who had previously reported their theft to the police. His words were confirmed, so suspicions were removed from him. In fact, such a trick was not something extraordinary, because some criminals resort to such tricks in order to confuse the trail and gain extra time. To obtain more information, experts from various fields were involved in the inspection of Taylor's vehicle. However, despite a thorough examination, this did not yield any results. Analyzing the missing girl's social circle, investigators immediately drew attention to a 38-year-old amateur photographer named Ben Foley, with whom Taylor was friends and met shortly before her disappearance. The man had no alibi for that evening. His testimony was confused and contradictory. He could not clearly explain where exactly he spent the night after Taylor's disappearance. Ben's apartment was of particular interest to detectives. They obtained search warrants for his home, as well as the room on campus that the missing girl shared with her roommate. The man immediately got on the list of suspects, because after questioning, investigators concluded that there was an intimate relationship between him and Taylor, and that he was clearly hiding something. During a check of Ben's computer, shocking facts were discovered. It turned out that the man owned several sites where he posted quite specific content. On one of these resources, he published photos of naked and half-naked girls, and all of them were much younger than him. Some of them were minors. There were even pictures of very young children aged 3-4 years. The missing girl also posed for Ben. Taylor's mother was convinced that the photographer was using her daughter's photos illegally. In addition to these dubious activities, Ben had a criminal history related to stalking and domestic violence. Immediately after the start of the investigation, it was noticed that the man began to hastily delete his sites, probably trying to hide something from the police. He even sent a message to his subscribers about the need for an urgent cleaning. It should be noted that Taylor lived in the early 2000s, when young people were just beginning to actively use the internet. It was all new. Previously, in order to find out something about a person's identity, it was necessary to communicate with them personally or with their immediate environment for a long time. However, the example of Taylor and Ben clearly demonstrated to detectives how easy it is to obtain valuable information about a person from social networks. Studying the girl's digital footprint on the internet, the police paid attention to her profile on the suspect's website. Here, Taylor appeared completely different than in real life. Instead of a self-confident, sociable, and active girl, she seemed a frightened and withdrawn person. Judging by the restrained description in the profile, she was looking for new acquaintances in Richmond, since she had recently moved and did not know many people in this city yet. Investigators managed to find out that Taylor last logged into this site on September 4, 2005, less than a day before her disappearance. That day, the girl actively corresponded with several friends. Basically, these were light, easy conversations with jokes. Already after Taylor disappeared and people began to worry about her, a huge number of messages with words of love and support were sent to her address. Numerous friends of the girl by correspondence sincerely wished that she would return home as soon as possible, safe and sound. They did not even suspect what the heroine of this story really had to go through. Police uncovered the main suspect's dark secrets step by step, and there turned out to be quite a few of them. Having analyzed the history of correspondence over the past few months, the detectives concluded that most of Taylor's online communication consisted of dialogues with Ben. As it turned out, very frank conversations took place between them, from which it followed that the couple had an intimate relationship once, and this happened even before the girl moved to the campus in Richmond. The missing girl's friend reported that after intimacy with Ben, Taylor no longer wanted to maintain an intimate relationship with him, but continued to communicate as a friend. Also, police officers noticed that, after the start of the investigation, Ben began to hastily delete and edit his messages, which only increased their suspicions that the man had something to hide. The relationship between Ben and Taylor also included shooting explicit photos. Even before moving to Richmond, the girl repeatedly visited Ben. For meetings, they chose unusual locations, for example, abandoned old buildings. Of course, this is not the best place for dates, but Ben insisted on such conditions for creating explicit shots. He believed that the gloomy atmosphere was ideal for the embodiment of his ideas, and he considered his work as works of art. In many messages, the name of the couple's favorite place was mentioned, Behl, located on the James River in the very heart of the city. Analyzing the correspondence, the investigators concluded that Taylor herself, despite her young age, took the initiative in the relationship with Ben. At the same time, the police suggested that an adult man still had some influence on the girl, because the age difference was a whole 20 years. Taylor herself, in her messages, called this difference life experience and did not see anything wrong with it. An important role in the investigation was played by Taylor's personal diaries, which the detectives managed to find. These records reflected the typical experiences of a teenager who had already left childhood but had not yet reached full maturity. Here were doubts, fears, anxieties, and thoughts that the girl could not share with anyone. For his part, Ben was known for his attraction to very young girls. All these facts, together with the history of violations of the law, played against him. Of course, Taylor, being a student, did not suspect that Ben was publishing explicit photos in which she posed on the internet. The girl sincerely believed that they were doing art solely for themselves, and no outsiders would see these pictures. According to investigators, she became another victim of the alleged criminal. From the pages of the diary, the police learned that Taylor met with different men, preferring those older than herself. Her idol was actor Johnny Depp, whose features she subconsciously sought in every adult acquaintance. Many believed that Ben outwardly resembled a celebrity. Perhaps this is what attracted the girl to him. At that time, there was no information about Taylor's fate. Detectives continued to question her inner circle. The parents told the investigators the story of their daughter's life. For some time, the family lived in Great Britain and Belgium, often moving from place to place, since the girl's mother was married to an officer of the Royal Air Force. After the breakup of that marriage, the mother and daughter were able to return to their native Virginia. The woman got married several more times, but these attempts also turned out to be unsuccessful. Taylor was a very energetic girl with a compliant character. Very smart, sometimes even too much for her age. These traits helped her quickly adapt to new schools. In total, young Taylor changed about 15 educational institutions before receiving a certificate and entering university. Everywhere, she easily made friends and made acquaintances. Sometimes the girl seemed too soft and trusting. For a long time, the mother tried to protect her daughter, believing that she was not yet ready for an independent adult life. The biography of the missing girl turned out to be full of ambiguous facts and secrets. The mother described Taylor as a willful and energetic girl. She grew up in a privileged environment surrounded by conservative and wealthy people. However, Taylor wanted to know the other side of life too, so after entering university, she decided to move to another city and settle on campus in order to achieve her goals on her own. Unfortunately, the young student did not even realize the dangers that could lurk behind the walls of a student dormitory. Despite good intentions, such places also have a dark side. Sometimes they turn into a real hotbed of undesirable phenomena among young people. Theft, substance abuse, promiscuous sexual relations. Since students are in close contact with each other, all this begins to manifest itself more clearly. At the same time, the vast majority of dorm residents are really focused on studying and getting an education. Without a wealth of life experience, it is very difficult to objectively assess the situation, which is what happened to Taylor. In the opinion of law enforcement officers, the missing girl made several serious mistakes at once. First of all, this concerns the relationship with a man who was twice her age, had convictions and mental health problems. A former girlfriend and a former roommate confirmed that Ben suffered from bipolar disorder, had sharp mood swings, and problems with anger control. In addition, detectives considered Taylor's decision to leave campus after 10 in the evening fatal. No one accompanied her, and she simply disappeared in the dark. And what is your opinion on this? Write in the comments, I will be interested to read. Investigators began compiling lists of dormitory neighbors who aroused suspicion. Police officers identified several students who were actively involved in the distribution of narcotic substances on campus. However, their alibi was confirmed. The mother of the missing girl suggested that the attack on Taylor could have been committed by several attackers. However, the most suspicious figure in this story remained 38-year-old Ben Foley, and detectives continued to closely investigate his identity. The man led a very active life on the internet. He owned several websites on various topics and revealed a lot of information about himself. Ben's subscribers even knew his shoe size, but compared to some of his thematic resources, this data seemed like a trifle. One of the most creepy turned out to be a site where a man published his distorted vision of beauty. He considered it creativity, but to detectives it seemed evidence of serious mental problems. On this resource, Ben combined images of naked bodies of models much younger than him with images of death, decaying flesh, and gothic motives. He often used real animal bones and skulls in his work. As it turned out, Ben managed to intrigue the 17-year-old student with his gloomy creativity. This is where their relationship began. It became known that before disappearing, Taylor felt lonely. In her notes, the girl admitted that she missed her friends who remained in her hometown. She had close friends and comrades, and in Richmond she had not yet managed to make enough acquaintances. Probably, that's why she communicated with the eccentric Ben. Of course, a passion for creepy images in itself did not make him a kidnapper, rapist, or murderer. But in combination with other facts of the man's biography, it caused more and more serious concerns. Studying Ben's online activity, police noticed that he displayed two completely different personalities. On the one hand, he appeared as a kind, loving, vulnerable, and creative person. On the other hand, numerous ex-girlfriends who posed for his photographs complained about him. Several former passions claimed that Ben was jealous, cruel, aggressive, and dangerous. Some girls even became victims of physical violence at his hands, although these episodes were too insignificant to report to the police. Instead, they simply broke off relations with the man after the first manifestations of aggression. But could an inexperienced 17-year-old student react incorrectly to such behavior and provoke an outburst of anger that led to murder? Suspicions about Ben Foley grew, but direct evidence was still lacking. Suddenly, on September 23, 2005, a new post appeared on Taylor's social media page. At 11:24 a.m., a message was published in which the girl claimed that she was fine and would soon return to her family. She mentioned some problems that needed to be urgently resolved, but did not go into details. Taylor's page gained considerable popularity after her disappearance and was under the close attention of many people. Therefore, the news of this post instantly spread around the city. However, the police considered the post an attempt at staging, as no one had yet managed to contact Taylor. Law enforcement officers did not believe that this message was written by the girl herself. On the same day that the new post appeared, the main suspect, Ben Foley, was arrested on charges of creating and storing pornographic materials involving minors. But the man insisted that none of the photographs found in his apartment belonged to him. According to him, these pictures were left by the previous tenant of the dwelling. At this stage of the investigation, the police had not yet charged Ben with official charges of involvement in Taylor's disappearance. In fact, he was not the only suspect in this case, but he certainly turned out to be the most colorful figure on the list. Given the time that had passed, the likelihood that the girl was still alive was extremely low. However, the investigators did not yet have convincing evidence against Foley. In any case, the trial regarding the obscene photos gave the detectives extra time to work while the suspect was behind bars. Meanwhile, the police came across a strange post by Ben published on September 8th. According to his story, he was attacked that evening. The man even had to file a report about this with the police. In one of his blogs, he described this incident in detail. According to Ben, 3 or 4 attackers attacked him. They immediately put a black bag over his head so he could not see their faces. Foley got away without serious injuries, but the attackers threw him out of the car somewhere on the outskirts of the city in the morning. They stole $20 from him, a camera and a tripod. The man had to walk to the city for a long time. However, during searches in his house, investigators found several expensive tripods and professional filming equipment at once. Such a variety of equipment looked suspicious, because officially Ben did not work anywhere and lived on disability benefits due to bipolar disorder. The main suspect definitely could not afford such expensive purchases, while receiving only state payments. Investigators intensified their efforts, trying to gather as much evidence as possible during a search of Foley's home. They managed to find several boxes with provocative items, from cold weapons, such as a huge machete, to sadomasochistic paraphernalia. Of course, the man claimed that all this was a prop for photo shoots. In addition, a suspicious stain resembling blood was found in Ben's house. Samples were sent for analysis. After the publication in the media of information about the seized items, suspicions about the amateur photographer with eccentric artistic views only intensified. Interestingly, the bloodstain was found on the man's bed spring frame. Experienced police officers immediately asked themselves the question, How much blood would have to be shed for it to soak through the mattress and reach the springs? During searches of the area around Folly's house, several strange items were found in a dumpster, including a necklace and a watch. Clearly not the kind of accessories that people usually just get rid of. The police were also puzzled by the huge machete found in Ben's home. However, according to his statements, it served as a prop for photo shoots. In addition, the machete allegedly helped him make his way through dense thickets on the way to abandoned buildings and chop wood for a fire. In fact, the police had at least one more suspect named Jesse Schultz, whom they also thoroughly checked. It turned out that this was a 22-year-old student whose trail was managed to be found with the help of service dogs. When Taylor's car was found, specially trained dogs were used to search for the alleged criminal's scent traces. In the end, the scent trail led to the house where this young man lived. According to Jesse's confession, he began dating Taylor in August 2005. It was during this period, almost immediately after the girl moved to Richmond, that alarming entries appeared in her diaries. The Schultz family turned out to be the same friends of Taylor's father with whom she lived in the first days after arriving in the city. Despite all the efforts of the investigators, the truth about what happened to Taylor turned out to be much more terrible than they could have imagined. Taylor immediately began to complain about the son of the Schultz couple. According to the girl, the young man was so intrusive in his courtship of her that she no longer felt safe under their roof. This is what caused her to move to the university campus. However, Taylor did not mention that they were dating. After the service dogs picked up the trail that led to Jesse, law enforcement officers conducted thorough searches in his home. Traces of narcotic substances were found in the guy's room, which gave grounds for his detention. However, no concrete evidence of Jesse's involvement in Taylor's disappearance was found. In addition, he had a reliable alibi, so his name was soon crossed off the list of suspects. On October 5, 2005, investigators spoke with one of the missing girl's friends named Kevin. Despite the fact that they only met 4 times in total, this was enough for Kevin to get the impression of Taylor as an extremely trusting person. In addition, in his opinion, the girl was quite pliable and easily influenced by others. The last time they saw Taylor was the day before her disappearance. At that time, the girl seemed very inspired and excited. On the eve of her 18th birthday, she confessed to Kevin that she was going to do something risky, but did not specify what she meant. The guy suggested that it was about some kind of photo shoot. Already post factum, Kevin found out about Taylor's disappearance. On the same day, he turned to the police to tell about the recent events in the girl's life that he had to witness. In particular, it was during that meeting that he first saw Ben Folly, whom Taylor introduced as her photographer friend. Kevin immediately felt hostility towards this man because he made a very suspicious impression on him. Later, Ben himself contacted Kevin, trying to find Taylor, because he could not do it on his own. The guy had a clear feeling that the photographer was hiding something. Throughout October, the search for the missing girl continued. Police officers examined numerous locations in the vicinity of Richmond. These were places that Ben photographed as part of his project dedicated to highlighting the city's problems. One of these objects even had a separate blog of the man dedicated to it. About 100 kilometers from Richmond, in Matthews County, the body of a young woman was found in a shallow pit. It was impossible to identify her on the spot due to significant damage. The body was in a terrible condition. The soft tissues had significantly decomposed due to environmental influences and the activity of small animals like wild dogs. It was a horrifying sight, and one of the forensic experts literally could not stop his mouth from gagging at what he saw. Identification of the deceased's identity became possible only thanks to the recognition of fragments of clothing by her mother. In the end, the examination finally confirmed that the found remains belonged to the missing Taylor Behl. The woman was devastated by grief and vowed to make every effort to punish the monster who committed this terrible crime against her daughter. The place where the body was found was established thanks to photographs taken by Ben. The attention of law enforcement officers was attracted by one of the locations that the man had been excessively interested in recently. It was decided to carefully examine the outbuildings located there, which brought results. The body of the deceased was found behind one of the barns on private property. Experts found that soil particles from the tires of Taylor's car were identical to soil samples taken near the barn. This indicated that the criminal had transported the body in the girl's car and then drove the car to another location. Most likely, Taylor was attacked almost immediately after she left the campus. It took no more than a few hours before she was dead. Fragments of duct tape were found on the remains of the body, suggesting that the girl was held tied up. Police turned to Ben Foley for comment. He claimed that the abduction was planned and carried out by his ex-girlfriend with the participation of several beefy young men. He himself was allegedly under the influence of drugs, did not directly participate in this madness, and does not remember anything. However, this testimony sounded extremely unconvincing. After confirmation of the worst fears, Taylor's family was waiting for only one thing: justice. After the discovery of the body, all the attention of the local community was riveted to the person of the eccentric amateur photographer. The fact is that Taylor's remains were found near Chesapeake Bay, in an area that had repeatedly appeared in Ben's photographs. This indicated that for a man, this location had a special, perhaps even sacred meaning. The version of a random coincidence was immediately rejected, because Foley was the last to see the girl alive on that fatal evening. In addition, he was previously noticed in such a strange activity as collecting car license plates. Creepy details from Ben's past surfaced. In particular, an incident when he attacked his ex-girlfriend with such rage that the poor girl managed to say goodbye to life. After that attack, the defendant even inflicted bodily injuries on himself. The conflict reached such a serious scale that the girl, miraculously saved, was forced to take a restraining order against her ex-boyfriend. An internet investigation revealed a whole series of similar cases of Ben's inappropriate behavior towards his passions. Gradually, the level of aggression in his actions only increased. All these facts formed in the eyes of detectives the image of a mentally unstable man with deviant tendencies who lured young, trusting girls into his networks. On January 17, 2006, Ben Foley was officially charged with the abduction, rape, and willful murder of Taylor Behl. Unfortunately, due to the extremely poor preservation of the body, forensic experts were never able to accurately determine all the circumstances of the girl's death. This led to the fact that already in February, serious amendments had to be made to the initial charges. At that time, the suspect was already serving a sentence for storing pornographic materials depicting minors. In the end, in August, Ben made a deal with the investigation and pleaded guilty to the crimes he was charged with, albeit very selectively choosing the wording. According to his version of events, that evening, he met with Taylor immediately after she left the campus. Together they went to a deserted place, where in the back seat of the car, Ben allegedly tied the girl's hands behind her back with duct tape, after which they had rough consensual sex. Then, in a fit of passion, the man allegedly accidentally strangled his partner. He left the body in the forest, and the next day he returned to hide the remains. Most of the facts cited by Ben remained unsubstantiated allegations that are difficult to prove. Although the forensic expert was unable to unequivocally determine the cause of Taylor's death, he insisted on its violent nature. After all, even with accidental strangulation, it takes effort for several minutes for a lethal result to occur. So, the attacker could have released the victim at any time. The prosecution insisted that Ben deliberately tied the girl's wrists, not for sexual games, but to deprive her of the opportunity to resist. And this meant that the whole story he voiced was a complete lie and the events unfolded in a completely different way. Foley stood his ground, assuring that the duct tape was part of a role-playing game. However, no one believed this version. Taylor's friends stated that she was never interested in extreme sexual practices such as asphyxia or bondage. While recreating the picture of events described by the accused, the investigators came to an unambiguous conclusion that the scenario he voiced does not stand up to any criticism. In the cramped space of a car, and even with her hands tied behind her back, the girl would be in an extremely uncomfortable and vulnerable position. Taking into account Taylor's character and habits, it is unlikely that she would voluntarily agree to this. A much more plausible version looked like Ben kidnapped, raped, and then killed his victim. The main motive for the crime was considered the girl's refusal to have an intimate relationship with Foley. During the court session, the prosecutor read out a letter that the defendant sent to his ex-girlfriend. It contained the following lines: "I am the cause of Taylor's death. I deserve imprisonment." These words could well be interpreted as an admission of guilt. Ben decided to make a deal with the prosecution and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The rest of the charges against him were dropped. In February 2006, the hapless photographer was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Taylor's mother was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. Now the woman knew that the soul killer who took the life of her only daughter had been justly punished. Some people lack even a shred of compassion. Cruelty is second nature to them, especially when it comes to juvenile offenders capable of inhuman acts. The town of Behl City, located in Alabama, USA, has a population of around 25,000 and is surrounded by Native American lands. Despite its rich history, it is now a quiet town where life flows at its usual pace. No one expected that such a shocking and horrific event would occur in one of the houses. On March 23, 1996, at 9:33 a.m., 16-year-old Mark Duke called the police. In an agitated voice, he reported that he had found his father dead in their own home. Upon arriving at the scene, officers discovered not one, but 4 bodies. The first victim was 39-year-old Randy Duke, Mark's father. A bloody trail led the police to the kitchen, where there were no victims, but the largest kitchen knife was missing. On the second floor, following the blood trail, they entered the bathroom. There lay Randy's 29-year-old fiancée, Deidre Hunt, and next to her was her younger 6-year-old daughter, Chalisa. The older 7-year-old daughter, Chelsea, was found in the bedroom, also on the second floor. The adults had been shot, with Deidre's body literally riddled with bullets. The girls' throats had been slit. Casings from .32 and .45 caliber weapons were found at the crime scene. Post-mortem lividity indicated that the murders had occurred over 24 hours earlier. Mark, who had called the police, was immediately questioned. The boy said that he had returned home in the evening and found his father dead. Without going into details and not seeing the other victims, he immediately called 911. The teenager was taken to the police station to calm down and be safe, as there was a possibility that the killer might return. In addition, the police hoped to obtain valuable information from him for the investigation. Randy Duke was born in Chicago in January 1958, but grew up in Alabama. He was 10 years older than his fiancée Deidre, who was born in Alabama in July 1967 and had barely turned 29 at the time of her death. The couple was already engaged and planning their wedding. Deidre had 2 daughters less than a year apart in age. The girls looked very similar but had completely different personalities. Chelsea was active and energetic, while the younger Chalisa was calm and quiet. The investigators ruled out the possibility of an attack by Deidre's ex-husband out of jealousy. Everyone who knew these families was aware that the woman had managed to maintain a friendly relationship with her ex-husband. During the divorce and custody arrangements, they had no disputes. The children stayed with their father so as not to change schools, but their mother regularly picked them up on weekends. The former spouses had no conflicts over this matter. Nevertheless, the man was thoroughly vetted, but he had a solid alibi and was excluded from the list of suspects. Detectives considered Randy's secret work at the Drug Enforcement Bureau as a possible motive for the crime, as he assisted in countering local drug dealers. Could he have been killed out of a desire for revenge? But this line of investigation also yielded no results. Randy and Deidre had been a couple for over a year before the man finally decided to propose to his beloved. The young woman happily agreed to become his wife. Randy had a son from a previous marriage, Mark, who lived with his father. However, the reason the boy stayed with his dad was not that he didn't want to change schools. The real reason was that his biological mother had practically no interest in her son's life. She had left the family almost immediately after the child was born. Randy raised Mark on his own, and the boy's mother only visited him rarely. Months could pass between her visits. From the outside, Randy and Deidre seemed like an ordinary couple in love. The man sincerely accepted his fiancée's daughters, who spent weekends with them, and Deidre, in turn, tried to find common ground with her future husband's son. It seemed that the victims had no enemies, and such a brutal attack was completely unusual for this town. Crimes like this had never happened here before. The police immediately noticed that the items in the house were chaotically scattered, as if someone had committed a failed robbery. However, nothing of value was missing from the home. Money was left in plain sight. Something didn't add up. Why shed so much blood if the intruder's goal was theft? Why did he not spare even the children? The detectives were convinced that the killer was motivated by personal reasons. The local community was stunned by these events. This town had never experienced high-profile murders, so 4 bodies at once had a shocking effect on all the county residents. News of the tragedy spread through the town like wildfire. When forensic experts were removing the bodies from the house, a crowd of frightened neighbors had already gathered outside. Local residents were gripped by panic. The victims' relatives were in shock, because just 2 days before, Dedra and the girls had been at a family dinner. At that time, everything was fine, and nothing foreshadowed trouble. Chalisa was preparing for her first beauty pageant, while Chelsea was carefreely playing board games. No one could have imagined that this meeting would be their last. At the press conference regarding this crime, the police refrained from making loud statements. The versions considered were 4 murders or a triple murder followed by a suicide. Such assumptions were based on the initial data collected at the bloody massacre site. The fact is that no signs of forced entry into the house were found. Therefore, from the very beginning of the investigation, the possibility of an attack by an outsider was excluded. The killer could only be someone from the family or a close circle of acquaintances who were trusted enough to open the door without hesitation. At the end of the press conference, law enforcement officials announced a $20,000 reward for any information that would help in apprehending the perpetrator. The relatives of the deceased categorically rejected the police's suggestion that the man could have voluntarily taken his own life. Randy was calm and level-headed. He would never have done such a thing. None of the family members suffered from mental disorders or harmful addictions. It was evident that someone else had done this. Moreover, judging by the use of weapons of 2 different calibers, there were at least 2 criminals. To obtain valuable information, the police questioned the neighbors, but unfortunately, none of them had heard or seen anything suspicious on the day of the tragedy. Meanwhile, the medical examiner completed the autopsy of the bodies. It was determined that the cause of death for Randy and Dedra was gunshot wounds. A bullet had knocked out the woman's teeth, and the children had choked on their own blood after their throats were cut. Judging by the numerous defensive wounds on her hands, Chelsea had desperately tried to fight back. During the autopsy, several non-fatal gunshot wounds were also found on the girl's body. The bullets matched the casings found at the crime scene. Forensic experts spent over 30 hours thoroughly examining the victim's house. Blood was everywhere, indicating that the attack had been carried out in a state of frenzied rage. Obviously, it was someone close to the family who had come to kill, driven by a strong personal motive. While investigators were collecting evidence, detectives were simultaneously communicating with Mark Duke, the teenager who had called 911 and was currently under police protection. However, the longer the young man was under the supervision of law enforcement, the more his composure surprised them. He acted as if nothing had happened, telling funny stories and jokes, and seemingly not at all concerned about the death of his family members. With each subsequent conversation, the police's suspicions about Mark only grew. Meanwhile, Mark's 14-year-old girlfriend came to the police station and told them that the boy had confessed to her about killing his own family. The girl was invited for an interview. At the precinct, she told the detectives that not only Mark, but also his friends were involved in the crime. She also shared other details about the brutal massacre. The teenager's friend agreed to record conversations of Mark's friends discussing the specifics of what they had done. These recordings gave the police sufficient grounds to call Mark and his buddies in for questioning. During the investigation, it was discovered that the 16-year-old young man had serious problems in his relationships with his family members. Several neighbors and acquaintances reported that there were frequent conflicts between the teenager, his father, stepmother, and her daughters. Most of the arguments were with his father, who was dissatisfied with his son's behavior both at school and at home. There were even witnesses who had heard Mark threaten to kill Randy. According to Mark himself, on the day of the tragedy, he was spending time with his friends. They went to the movies together. To support his words, the boy even showed a ticket stub, hoping that it would be his reliable alibi. However, the medical examiner's conclusion nullified the story. The murders had occurred not on March 23rd, as initially thought, but 36 hours before the police arrived at the victim's house. When new facts came to light, Mark was forced to admit that he had not stayed at home for several days. According to him, just before the massacre, he was hanging out with 19-year-old Brandon Samra, 17-year-old Michael Ellison, and another 17-year-old friend, David Collins. This foursome was inseparable and was known in town as a troubled group. All the boys were questioned one by one at the police station. During a conversation with detectives, Brandon almost immediately cracked. He told them about a chilling dialogue that had taken place between him and his 16-year-old friend, Mark Duke. Brandon knew that Mark had serious problems with his father, who constantly put pressure on him. The biggest arguments between them arose over Mark's poor performance in school and the crowd he was hanging out with. Of course, the young man was rebelling against his father's authority, as is typical for that age, but no one could have imagined what this confrontation would lead to. On March 22nd, the whole gang gathered together. They visited the home of Randy Duke, Mark's father, and the boy asked his permission to take the pickup truck to ride around with his friends. But the man refused. As soon as the group walked away from the house, Mark became incredibly angry. That's when he confessed to the guys that he had long been hatching a plan to kill his father. Moreover, he had already gotten his hands on a .45 caliber pistol somewhere. Michael Ellison, in turn, obtained a .32 caliber weapon. Where the teenagers got these pistols from is not exactly known, but it is assumed that they were stolen. Mark carefully wiped each bullet and both pistols to avoid leaving fingerprints. Michael did the same. But alas, none of the friends had the sense to dissuade Mark from this terrible idea, or at least warn his relatives. Upon arriving at the Duke residence, Mark took the .45 caliber pistol in his hands, while Brandon held the .32 caliber weapon. The young man was filled with determination and stressed that the entire family, all four of them, had to die. Two armed teenagers entered the house through the back door, while the rest of the gang waited outside. As soon as the intruders were inside, they immediately encountered Randy. Mark fired but missed, and the man managed to throw a heavy statuette from the table at him. Unfortunately, this failed to knock the gun out of the attacker's hands. The young man fired 2 more times, and both bullets hit their target. The father fell dead. Brandon recounted that, at that moment, the killer shouted for Randy to go to hell. At the same time, Brandon saw Dedra, who was standing near Randy at the time of the attack, in the sights of his pistol. The bullet hit the woman in the face, but only grazed her slightly. The mother grabbed her daughters and rushed upstairs, hoping to hide on the 2nd floor. The teenagers continued shooting. To their great regret, Dedra did not manage to escape. 2 bullets hit her in the back, one of which inflicted a fatal wound. Despite her serious injuries, the woman used her last strength to put up a desperate resistance, trying to protect her children. She managed to crawl to the 2nd floor and hide with her younger daughter, Chalisa, in the bathroom. The older Chelsea ran to the bedroom and hid under the bed. After making sure that his father was dead, Mark went upstairs, where Brandon already was. He was unsuccessfully trying to break down the bathroom door. Together, the underage killers managed to force their way inside, and Brandon finished off Dedra with another shot. At this point, they ran out of ammunition, so Mark grabbed a knife he had taken from the kitchen. With it, he slit 6-year-old Chalisa's throat twice. The frenzied monsters did not stop there. Now they were looking for the older girl, Chelsea. Unfortunately, her hiding place turned out to be unreliable. Upon discovering the child under the bed, the teenagers pulled her out. The girl desperately fought back and managed to inflict about 15 stab wounds to her left arm and 3 more to her right before Mark restrained her. The stepbrother held the victim with her head pulled back, and Brandon, despite her pleas for mercy, cold-bloodedly slashed Chelsea's throat. After this brutal massacre, the subhumans washed the blood off their hands. Mark took both pistols and swiped his father's wallet, after which they left the crime scene. Tossing the knife into a storm drain, the group got into Randy's pickup truck and went to hang out as if nothing had happened. The next day, all 4 of them went to the movie theater to watch the horror film, Scream. They even kept the tickets to use later as an alibi. After that, the thugs returned to the Duke house to stage a robbery. They rummaged through the entire dwelling, stole some items, and deliberately made a mess. When the rest of the criminals left, Mark called 911, pretending that he had just returned home and discovered the bloody carnage. When Brandon recounted this chilling story, both young killers were arrested. By March 26th, they were charged with the premeditated brutal murder of 4 people, which under Alabama state law was punishable by death via lethal injection. Initially, Mark refused the appointment of a lawyer, but he was later provided with a defense attorney, as required by procedure. The police managed to quickly solve this case, so at the time of the arrest, the teenager's scratches, received in the struggle with the desperate Chelsea in her final moments, had not even healed yet. Under the tortured child's fingernails, forensic experts found skin particles belonging to Mark and Brandon, which became another piece of evidence of their guilt. The local community was shocked when they learned who was really behind this brutal murder. People could not believe that such young creatures were capable of displaying such cruelty. Particularly striking was the inhumanly cold-blooded manner in which they massacred the little girls. It defied comprehension. Within a few days, the police detained 2 more minors, Michael Ellison and David Collins, Mark's friends. The 17-year-old boys were charged with complicity. All 4 were held behind bars and denied bail, as they posed an extreme danger to society. As it was later revealed, all these teenagers were members of a youth gang, consisting of about 10 individuals. 19-year-old Brandon was the oldest among them, but surprisingly, he was not the leader. The young man agreed to kill an entire family without hesitation, just to strengthen his authority in the eyes of the other gang members. Investigators discovered that symbols indicating the gang's involvement were carved on the walls of the Duke house. Despite all efforts, the investigation was unable to determine whether other members of the gang had directly participated in the massacre. It is only known that they all had problems in school, and some had already been held responsible for less serious crimes. Mark, for example, was a participant in a special community program for troubled teens. The other 3, Brandon, Michael, and David, had dropped out of school altogether. Brandon had also run away from home after his parents tried to forcibly send him for treatment for drug addiction, which he had acquired while still in school. The defendant's lawyer tried to evoke sympathy from the jury and secure a more lenient sentence. The defense attorney claimed that Mark had become violent due to a difficult childhood. Allegedly, problems with his father began shortly before the tragedy, when the teenager tried to join his father's business. Randy was engaged in repairs and worked for himself, so he wanted to make his son his assistant. But that's when the boy's difficult character manifested itself. As for Mark's mother, she had essentially abandoned her son when he was still an infant. The woman left the family when the boy was only 6 months old and subsequently visited him only rarely. The last time she saw Mark was 3 months before the massacre. Such neglect from his own mother undoubtedly became a real trauma for the child. Psychologists suggested that against the background of problematic relationships with his parents, the appearance of Dedra and her daughters could have become a triggering event. Brandon's trial began in mid-March 1998. The defendant did not plead guilty, citing insanity. The accused's interests in court were represented by a state-appointed lawyer. At the very beginning of the hearings, the defense attorney filed a motion to change the venue of the sessions, citing excessive publicity of the case. But the court rejected this demand. The prosecutors had strong evidence, a recorded confession from Brandon in which he described his actions during the crime in detail. However, the accused later recanted his words. The lawyer insisted that the young man was influenced by mental deviations, as well as pressure from other gang members who forced him to slander himself. A court-appointed psychiatrist was assigned to conduct a psychiatric evaluation of Brandon. The doctor carefully examined the defendant and, based on the results, compiled an extensive 21-page report. In the conclusion, the specialist noted that Brandon was sane at the time of committing the crime. Additionally, an MRI scan of the accused's brain was performed, which also did not reveal any pathological changes. The teenager demonstrated completely adequate behavior and was aware of the consequences of his actions. Despite the lawyer's persistent attempts to prove his client's insanity, this line of defense failed. The defense attorney then decided to focus on another aspect. He drew the jury's attention to Brandon's low level of intelligence. After all, the young man's IQ was only 73, which was confirmed by the results of working with a clinical psychologist and the conclusion of a certified forensic expert. Due to his delayed mental development, the teenager was highly susceptible to the influence of other gang members, which ultimately pushed him to participate in this horrible murder. Moreover, Brandon had not previously had serious problems with the law. During the investigation, it was also discovered that the 19-year-old defendant often used various satanic symbols. The defense lawyer wanted to demonstrate these drawings to the jury, hoping to prove the immaturity and mental retardation of his client. It should be noted that at that time in America, there was a surge in youth's fascination with Satanism. The interviewed psychologists assumed that Brandon perceived all this symbolism purely as an element of a game. Several specialists reached this conclusion after communicating with the defendant. However, this move by the lawyer led to the opposite effect. Instead of seeing Brandon as a mentally unstable, troubled young man, the jury began to perceive him as the embodiment of the devil himself. It would seem that nothing could further harm the defendant's reputation, but in reality, it was this miscalculation by the defense that determined the outcome of the entire trial. Brandon's relatives also came to the hearing. The young man's sister and father insisted that they could never have expected such cruelty and cold-bloodedness from him. They were shocked that the boy was capable of such brutality. After all, Brandon had not previously shown a propensity for violence or other serious offenses. The defendant's father said that he first suspected something was wrong when Brandon was in 7th grade. That's when the man found out that his son had started smoking marijuana. He gave the boy an ultimatum: either he goes to rehab or he gets out of the house. Brandon chose the latter. In high school, the young man did try to go through an appropriate program, but then he ran away from home again. As a result, he never received a high school diploma. It cannot be unequivocally stated whether the defense lawyer made these mistakes intentionally, but objectively, they only hastened the triumph of justice. After a brief deliberation, 10 out of 12 jurors found that 20-year-old Brandon Samra had no right to life. A year after the trial ended, he was sentenced to the death penalty. Mark's trial began 2 years after the horrific massacre that claimed the lives of 4 people. All the young people who were involved in the investigation and gave testimony unanimously claimed that it was Mark who initiated the attack on his own father. There was no doubt about this. The boy had planned and led this brutal assault. From the very beginning, the prosecutors built their case based on the testimony of Mark's gang friends, Michael, David, and Brandon. It was believed that the reason for the outburst of aggression was the father's refusal to lend his son the family pickup truck for entertainment with his friends, as well as years of accumulated anger and resentment toward his relatives. Thanks to the thorough work of forensic experts who painstakingly collected and examined all the traces left at the crime scene, it was possible to reconstruct a complete picture of those chilling events. All the evidence indicated the truthfulness of the confessions of the other participants in the bloody massacre. The prosecution's evidence base was so strong and comprehensive that Mark's lawyer did not even try to prove his client's innocence. Instead, the tactic chosen was to seek the most lenient sentence possible. The defense attorney tried to play on the fact that Randy Duke was a cruel, alcoholic father who had abused his son for years. Allegedly, Mark's teenage psyche could not withstand such pressure, and at some point, the cup of patience overflowed, which pushed him to an armed attack. However, this version in no way explained why Mark also killed Dedra and her 2 innocent daughters. After hearing all the arguments of the parties, the jury went to the deliberation room to determine the verdict. However, they only needed about half an hour for discussion. On March 3, 1999, the jury unanimously found 18-year-old Mark Duke guilty of committing premeditated murders. Moreover, they recommended sentencing the teenager to the death penalty, despite the fact that at the time of the crime, he had not yet reached the age of majority. Ultimately, the court agreed with this position and made the final verdict. The underage killer was to be executed. In 1999, Brandon Samra, the second direct perpetrator of the murders, filed an appeal against the death sentence but was denied. Michael Ellison and David Collins, who were sentenced to 16 years in prison for complicity, petitioned for parole in 2004 after serving 6 years, but their request was also rejected. Both were able to be released only in 2013, having fully served their assigned punishment. Mark Duke filed several appeal petitions asking to replace the death penalty with life imprisonment, but each time he was refused. But suddenly, in 2005, the U.S. Supreme Court made a decision that radically changed the convict's fate. As part of the consideration of another high-profile case, a precedent was set: a ban on the use of capital punishment for persons who had not reached the age of 18 at the time of committing a particularly serious crime. This automatically overturned Mark's death sentence. From now on, he could hope to live out his days, albeit behind bars. To this day, Mark Duke is serving a life sentence at the St. Clair Correctional Facility in the city of Springville, Alabama. But for the second shooter, Brandon Samra, this innovation did not help. At the time of the double murder, he was already 19 years old, so the death sentence remained in force. While serving his sentence on Alabama's death row in 2019, Brandon made a final attempt to appeal the court's decision, but he was denied again, and this happened literally days before the scheduled execution date. On May 16, 2019, 42-year-old Brandon Samra was administered a lethal injection. Before departing into eternity, he managed to utter a few short words. "I would like to thank Jesus for everything I have." After the injection, the condemned man was dying for an unusually long time, a whole 27 minutes. One of the lawyers involved in Brandon's case said that literally a few days before his client's execution, a glimmer of hope for salvation appeared. The defenders tried until the very end to save the life of this killer, because up until the moment of committing the terrible crime, he had only minor offenses on his record and no serious problems with the law. Hope was given by a bill signed by the state governor in 2017. The document prohibited disregarding the votes of jurors who spoke in favor of life imprisonment rather than the death penalty if there were less than 12 of them. And in Brandon's situation, that was exactly the case. 2 out of 12 jurors voted to give him a life sentence. But Alabama is a conservative state, and according to local rules, even in such a case, the judge could insist on the death penalty. So although the lawyers fought for Brandon's life until the end, arguing that due to serious cognitive impairments, he did not fully realize his actions during the attack, it was all in vain. A lot of criticism from lawyers and the public was also directed at the work of Brandon's attorney during the first trial. The defense lawyer made several unfortunate mistakes, in particular, mentioning the defendant's fascination with satanic symbolism, which had an extremely negative impact on the jury's opinion. The lawyer's explanation was as follows. He allegedly wanted to demonstrate the client's emotional immaturity, but the effect was the opposite. These details only brought the death sentence closer. Many people also pointed out the obvious injustice committed by the court. After all, despite the fact that it was Mark Duke who was the organizer and main initiator of the brutal family massacre, he was punished more leniently than his accomplice. Many people were inclined to believe that Brandon, due to his mental retardation, could not adequately assess the situation and make informed decisions at all. Psychologists noted his strong dependence on his surroundings and inability to act independently without guidance from more authoritative individuals. So, if it hadn't been for Mark, who basically manipulated his friend, Brandon most likely would never have committed such a terrible crime, and it would have been logical if the organizer had received a harsher sentence than the perpetrator. The adoption of the law on mitigating punishments for juvenile offenders sparked heated discussions in society. Many people wondered, can a person's maturity be determined solely on the basis of passport data? And what about those like Brandon Samra, mentally retarded with the intellect of a 13-year-old child? In some states, according to local legislation, an 18-year-old citizen can be executed or allowed to vote in elections, but at the same time, he does not have the right to purchase alcohol. Isn't that absurd? These contradictions became particularly acute against the backdrop of the bloody events at the Duke House. However, there were also those who believed that justice was restored in this story, and the punishment fully corresponded to the crime committed. The relatives of the victims considered the sentence to be rightful revenge. They stressed, how can one justify with mental disabilities the fact that Brandon shot the defenseless Dedra several times and then slashed the throat of a little girl with his own hands while an accomplice held her for convenience? He did this voluntarily, without any coercion, and therefore he deserved adequate punishment for his atrocities.
The defendant may think she destroyed Lulu and Leo, but she is a failure in this too. Lulu and Leo are powerful forces.
I'm very sorry for everything that happened.
On the afternoon of October 25th, 2012, at around 5 p.m., Marina Krim, a mother of 3, arrived at a ballet studio with her younger daughter to pick up her older daughter, who was supposed to have been brought there by her nanny. However, to the woman's great surprise, it turned out that her 6-year-old girl hadn't shown up for class that day at all. Gripped by an alarming premonition of trouble, Marina, without wasting a minute, rushed to her apartment located in the prestigious Upper West Side neighborhood of New York. On the way, she desperately tried to call the nanny, but all attempts were in vain. She stubbornly didn't answer the phone. Upon reaching the building, Marina and her daughter dashed into the apartment. Inside, an unusual darkness and eerie silence prevailed. No one responded to their calls. At first, the woman assumed that perhaps no one was home and the nanny had simply taken the children out for a walk in the park. She went down to the concierge to ask if he had seen the nanny with the kids. He assured her that he had seen them returning to the building quite recently, so they should be in the apartment. Intrigued by this information, Marina returned to the apartment with her daughter and began thoroughly examining each room. When she reached the bathroom and noticed a sliver of light under the door, she opened it and found herself confronted with the most horrific scene of her life. In the bathtub, which was filled with blood, lay the lifeless bodies of her 2 children, and next to them, holding a blood-stained kitchen knife in her hands, sat the nanny. Upon seeing the mother's shocked reaction, she twice plunged the blade into her own throat. Gripped by panic and horror, Marina ran out of the apartment with her daughter, screaming. Neighbors, hearing the mother's heart-wrenching cries, along with the building staff who tried to calm her down, immediately called emergency services by dialing 911. The New York City police officers who arrived at the scene found themselves facing a sight that more closely resembled a nightmarish scene from a horror movie than reality. In the bathroom of the Krim family's apartment, 2 small children were dying from stab wounds. Their mother was completely beside herself with grief and fear. And on the floor lay the nanny, also covered in blood and in critical condition. The medics who examined the victims found signs of life in the nanny and children and urgently transported them to the hospital. But unfortunately, the little ones could not be saved. They died just as they crossed the threshold of the hospital. At the time of her death, Lucia was only 6 years old, and her brother Leo was just 2. The 50-year-old nanny, Yoselyn Ortega, survived, although she suffered severe injuries. She had to undergo surgery, during which doctors fought for her life. The woman had managed to inflict deep cuts on her arms and injured her neck with such force that she even broke vertebrae. Marina and her daughter were also hospitalized, but in a different ambulance. Due to the acute shock of what she had witnessed, the woman completely lost the ability to speak clearly and could not coherently give a statement to the police. She was given a sedative to somewhat stabilize her emotional state. As it turned out, her husband was just about to return from a business trip. Upon landing at the airport, he listened to a voice message from his wife in which she was shouting something incoherently through hysterical sobs. The only thing he could make out was that something terrible had happened to the children. Right at the airport, he was intercepted by the police, who informed him of the terrible news about the tragedy that had befallen his family. The man could not withstand such a blow and fainted. Upon regaining consciousness, he received first aid and immediately headed to the hospital where his wife was. The parents were completely shattered and devastated by the loss of their little ones. They couldn't fathom how the nanny, whom they had known for 2 years and who had cared for their children, becoming almost a family member, could commit such a horrible act. A neighbor of the Krim family recounted that literally half an hour before the tragedy, she had seen the nanny returning from a walk with the children, riding up in the elevator, and everything seemed completely normal. Yoselyn did not appear upset or agitated, rather. She seemed emotionless, cold, and detached, not reacting to the kids' antics and play with each other. However, as the neighbor noted, the nanny had always behaved rather reservedly, so the woman did not attach any special significance to this, especially since the children looked quite happy and playful, laughing and having fun. No one could have imagined that this neighbor would be the last to see them alive and joyful. Other nannies from the area, who usually communicated closely, were friends, helped each other out, and could substitute for one another when needed, had barely any contact with Yoselyn. She didn't get close to anyone, kept to herself, and gave the impression of being a closed-off and secretive person. The other nannies considered her odd and avoided getting to know her better. The news of the tragedy in the Krim family shocked the entire community. Caring residents brought flowers, candles, and words of sympathy to the home where the deceased children had lived. The medical examiners who performed the autopsies were struck by the brutality with which the nanny had dealt with the children. The little ones were practically decapitated. Lucia's body had over 30 stab and slash wounds, causing severe bleeding. The numerous injuries eloquently testified to the desperate resistance of the girl who fought for her life until her last breath. On the body of her 2-year-old brother, 5 deep knife wounds were found, all concentrated in the neck area. The toddler's throat was mercilessly slit from behind, so no traces of self-defense were found on his body. The investigators had no doubts about who was the perpetrator of this horrific murder. All suspicions immediately fell on the nanny, so the detectives set about thoroughly studying her personality and past, hoping to find clues that would shed light on the motives behind this brutal crime. As it turned out, Yoselyn Ortega was born in 1962 in the Dominican Republic. In a large family of 8 children, she was the youngest. The Ortega family was not poor. The parents owned a profitable wine business, so they could provide a decent life for their sizable brood. Little Yoselyn grew up in an atmosphere of love and care, surrounded by the attention of her relatives. Up until her teenage years, the girl did not know what hardship and difficulties were. But one day, Yoselyn's carefree childhood was overshadowed by terrible news. Her older sister had suddenly died from a brain aneurysm. This tragic event became a real shock for the girl and dealt a devastating blow to her fragile psyche. For about a year, Yoselyn did not leave the house, completely losing interest in the outside world. She sank into depression and wept uncontrollably for her prematurely deceased sister. It was during this gloomy period that Yoselyn began to be plagued by horrific hallucinations. Voices sounded in her head, urging the girl to harm those around her. The frightened girl did not dare tell her parents about this, confiding only in some of her sisters and begging them to keep it a secret. For many years, this remained a closely guarded secret. Even Yoselyn's parents did not suspect the strange voices that were eating away at their daughter's mind. Of course, they noticed some changes in the girl's behavior, strange antics, and outbursts of irritability. But they attributed it to teenage whims and prolonged depression after her sister's death. Despite her psychological troubles, Yoselyn tried to live a normal life. She stubbornly resisted the insidious whispers of the ghostly voices and did not give in to the temptation to hurt anyone. After finishing school, the girl decided to continue her education and enrolled in university, where she chose the profession of an accountant. Obtaining a higher education was not easy for Yoselyn, as the burden of mental suffering and hidden psychiatric disorders drained her strength. But despite all the difficulties, the persistent girl managed to successfully complete her studies and received her coveted diploma in 1985. Soon after graduation, Yoselyn dared to make radical changes in her life and moved to New York, where one of her sisters already lived. The sister gladly welcomed Yoselyn into her home, and the sisters began living under the same roof, sharing all the worries and joys. Both girls worked hard to pay for housing and daily necessities. Later on, a man appeared in Yoselyn's life, with whom she began a romantic relationship. And in 1995, the couple got married. The following year, the newlyweds were blessed with their firstborn, whom they named Jesus. Unfortunately, after the son's birth, the relationship between the young couple began to deteriorate. Despite desperate attempts to save the marriage, Yoselyn and her husband divorced in 1999. The woman was left alone with a small child in her arms in the middle of the luxurious but ruthless New York, where the cost of living was sky high. Yoselyn's financial situation became catastrophic. Money was critically lacking. After painful deliberation, the woman made the difficult decision to take 4-year-old Jesus to her parents in the Dominican Republic, so that they could take care of their grandson. She herself returned to the USA, where she had more chances to earn decent money for herself and her son. Upon returning to the metropolis, Yoselyn settled in with her sister. The women supported each other, working together at a factory and doing cleaning jobs on the side to make ends meet. Despite the distance, Yoselyn communicated with her parents and son almost daily, maintaining a connection with her family. In 2004, she finally managed to obtain U.S. citizenship. Saving every cent she earned, in March 2008, Yoselyn had accumulated enough money to return to her homeland and finally reunite with Jesus. Mother and son were together again, and life was gradually getting back on track. But suddenly, in April of the same year, an unpredictable tragedy occurred. A close friend of Yoselyn took his own life by shooting himself on his own balcony. The news of this suicide stunned the woman and again pushed her into a depressive abyss. The pain of loss and shock were so unbearable that they completely shattered Yoselyn's fragile psyche. Paranoid thoughts began to take over her mind, and morbid fears grew like an avalanche. The woman was terrified that someone might attack her or her son. She refused to leave the house and categorically forbade Jesus from attending school. Even the ordinary noise from the street, such as a dog barking, made Yoselyn panic and hide under the bed with her son. Fortunately, over time, the severity of the psychological crisis subsided somewhat. Yoselyn began to come to her senses, gradually getting rid of her obsessive fears and anxieties. The woman decided to return to the USA to earn money again. She left Jesus in the care of her parents and went to New York in search of work. There, Yoselyn later met the wealthy Krim couple, who were just looking for a nanny for their children. The head of the family was Kevin Krim, a graduate of the prestigious Harvard University. His chosen one, Marina, had also received an elite education, graduating from the University of Southern California. The pair of creative personalities met through mutual friends at an Italian restaurant. Sympathy immediately flared up between them. In 2003, Marina and Kevin got married, and later they had 2 daughters. Lucia, the firstborn, was born in 2006, and the younger Nessie in 2009. When Marina became pregnant with their 3rd child, Kevin was offered a prestigious position as an executive director at the CNBC television channel. So the family decided to move from California to New York. By that time, the man had already worked in executive positions at Bloomberg and Yahoo, so his career growth was rapid. The Krim family settled in the elite Upper West Side neighborhood of Manhattan, just a block away from the famous Central Park. While Kevin worked hard, Marina completely devoted herself to caring for the children and the household. Later, the woman decided to create a personal blog where she shared her thoughts about the everyday life of a mother and the joys of family life. At some point, Marina realized that she could not cope with all the hassles. Her younger daughter Nessie's health became an obstacle, as she required special attention and care. Moreover, Marina was carrying her 3rd child, and in the late stages of pregnancy, she could barely manage to drive the girls to their extra activities to the dance studio and the pool. And Kevin was often away on business trips and could not lend his reliable shoulder. So the couple jointly decided to hire a nanny who would help take care of the children and handle household chores. In the affluent circles where the Krim family moved, hired help was a common thing. Almost every well-off family had a housekeeper, and often a nanny for the children as well. So this decision seemed quite sensible and appropriate to Kevin and Marina. Kevin and Marina set about looking for a nanny for their children. It was at the dance studio where Marina took her daughters that the couple was lucky enough to meet Yoselyn's sister Celia, who worked as a housekeeper for a wealthy family. Celia spoke warmly of Yoselyn and even sent the Krims her resume. After reviewing the documents, Kevin and Marina were pleasantly surprised by the potential nanny's solid experience working with children. To verify the information, the couple contacted the family where Yoselyn had allegedly worked before and received a glowing recommendation from them. This finally convinced the Krims to invite the woman for an interview. At the personal meeting, Yoselyn made the best impression on the couple. She was friendly, sincerely smiling, and kind. Moreover, she managed to instantly find common ground with the children, so there was no doubt left Yoselyn was hired as a part-time nanny. Her workday lasted from noon until evening, during which time she took care of the little ones and helped Marina with household chores. It later turned out that this whole story with the resume and recommendations was a fabrication from start to finish. Unlike her sister, Yoselyn had no experience in childcare. She simply desperately needed a well-paying job. So when the opportunity arose to get hired by the Krim family and earn a decent $500 a week, the temptation was too great. Her sister helped Yoselyn fabricate a resume, and they added a niece's phone number as the contact for the alleged previous employer. The girl readily confirmed the made-up story. Although Yoselyn lacked experience, she quickly got the hang of her new duties and did an excellent job with the children. For about 2 years, harmony and understanding reigned in the nanny's relationship with the family, right up until that fateful day that brought a terrible tragedy. Kevin and Marina could not even imagine that the woman, who seemed gentle and kind-hearted at first glance, was capable of a brutal crime. Yoselyn appeared to be the embodiment of an angelic nature, evoking boundless trust. The couple sincerely believed that their children were in complete safety with her. Thanks to the nanny's help, Marina had more free time. She even started teaching at an art school that was her longtime hobby. In addition, the woman did not abandon her blog, which she had been running for a long time. Yoselyn treated the children entrusted to her as if they were her own. Sometimes she even joked that now she had not one son, but 4 little ones. In turn, the kids were drawn to her and showed genuine affection. They gave the nanny touching drawings, and the Krim's younger son generally refused to fall asleep without Yoselyn. But despite her complete trust in the nanny, Marina preferred to be cautious. Only rarely, in extreme cases, did she leave the children alone with Yoselyn. On all other days, the mother was with the little ones, and the nanny simply assisted her. Even if Marina had to leave for a short while, she would ask relatives to keep an eye on Yoselyn. According to her sister, Yoselyn was sincerely happy with her job in the Krim family. Despite the part-time work, the salary was quite decent. In addition, the employers did not skimp on gifts, including expensive ones. One time, they even purchased a ticket to the Dominican Republic so that the nanny could visit her relatives. The Crims became so close to Yoselyn that in February 2012, they even invited her to join them on their vacation to the Dominican Republic. There they met the nanny's family and even spent one night in their house. The vacation was a great success, and in addition to pleasant memories, the Crims brought many gifts for Yoselyn's relatives, including her adult son Jesus. Moreover, the couple helped the young man move from the Dominican Republic to New York to be closer to his mother. They gave 17-year-old Jesus an iPad to facilitate his studies, allowed him to stay at their home, and paid him decent money for simply walking the dogs. Yoselyn's son planned to enroll in college after finishing school. But despite the fact that he had already received a diploma in his homeland, in America, he had to return to the classroom this time in 11th grade to master the curriculum of local schools. Public schools refused to accept the young man, so Yoselyn had to send her son to a private educational institution, which cost her a pretty penny. Overall, the woman was simply obsessed with her son. Her maternal care bordered on overprotection. Yoselyn forbade the boy to go outside unnecessarily. When there was a loud noise somewhere, she forced Jesus to hide under the bed, as in childhood. And when the young man went to school, his mother secretly followed him, fearing that something bad might happen to her treasure. In April 2012, hard times came for Yoselyn. She and her son were evicted from the rental apartment in the Bronx. In vain had the woman invested so much money in arranging the housing, the apartment owner unceremoniously threw them out. They had to return to the cramped apartment where Yoselyn's 3 sisters already lived with their families, a total of 6 people. It was impossible to move back in such a tight space. Circumstances forced Yoselyn to ask the Crims for a raise in order to be able to rent more spacious housing. The couple met her halfway, agreeing to pay the nanny extra if she would also clean their house for 5 hours a week. Yoselyn agreed to everything. For the first time in a long while, the woman felt what financial hardship was. After all, now she had to single-handedly take care of her son and pay for housing. Despite a decent income, expenses still exceeded revenues, which infuriated Yoselyn terribly. To earn extra money, she began selling costume jewelry and cosmetics to her neighbors. At first, things were going well. Encouraged by the initial success, Yoselyn even gave an acquaintance a batch of cosmetics to sell, hoping to expand her business this way. But it was in vain. The hapless partner disappeared, returning neither the goods nor the money. As a result, Yoselyn was left with considerable debts. She had to look for additional side jobs. The woman began cooking simple chicken and rice dishes and selling them. Yoselyn was completely exhausted by the excessive burden of additional duties that she had so recklessly taken on her fragile shoulders. Drained to the limit, the woman never tired of complaining to her loved ones about her unenviable situation. "I'm paid to look after the children, not to clean and do housework," she stated bitterly. The nanny believed that the wealthy Crim family should have raised her pay without any extra conditions, and she perceived the need to take on additional tasks as an insulting disdain. Upon learning that Marina, aware of Yoselyn's difficult financial situation, had begun recommending her as a nanny to her friends and acquaintances, she was consumed with righteous anger. There was no end to new clients. A thought burned in Yoselyn's mind. She decided that the insidious Marina deliberately wanted to overwhelm her with work so that the nanny would have no time left for her own son. The resentment that secretly smoldered in Yoselyn's soul flared up stronger every day, like a fire in peat bogs. The woman was visibly losing strength. She was exhausted from working herself to the bone. In a matter of months, she had lost weight, grown haggard, and dark circles had formed under her eyes. Once cheerful and smiling, Yoselyn had now turned into a gloomy shadow of herself, tired, depressed, and clearly disappointed with life. But worst of all, the demonic hallucinations that had haunted her since childhood returned with a vengeance. In her sleep and while awake, Yoselyn heard eerie voices and saw ghostly visions. Her sleep became restless and intermittent. The nanny's sister noticed striking changes. Yoselyn began to pray incredibly often, never letting go of religious magazines, seeing in them protection from demons. She even started seeing a psychologist, hoping to get help. But the woman did not breathe a word to Marina and Kevin about her precarious mental state. She was too afraid of losing her job, even though she hated it more and more. On that fateful day, October 25th, 2012, Yoselyn arrived at the Crims' home around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, as usual. Marina was already waiting for her at the door, about to take her younger daughter to a swimming lesson. The mistress instructed the nanny to pick up 6-year-old Lucia from school, take the girl to her ballet class, then return home and put 2-year-old Leo to bed. Marina herself intended to then pick her daughter up from ballet and finally reunite with the children and the nanny at the apartment. Yoselyn obediently carried out the first part of the request together with little Leo. They met Lucia near the school, as agreed with Marina. But instead of taking the girl to ballet, the nanny took the children to the park, treated them to ice cream, and then returned home with them. In the entrance of the building, Yoselyn did something unprecedented. She lingered by the concierge and inquired if he had happened to see Marina. "No, your mistress has not returned yet," he replied. The nanny went up to the apartment with the children in the elevator, accidentally bumping into a neighbor along the way. And just half an hour later, a bloody tragedy unfolded behind the doors of the luxurious dwelling. Around the appointed time, Marina, together with her middle daughter Nessie, arrived at the ballet studio, hoping to see Lucia there. But the girl was nowhere to be found. Marina felt her heart beating anxiously. The nanny had never violated her instructions before. The woman immediately called Yoselyn, but she stubbornly did not answer. Beside herself with worry, Marina raced home at breakneck speed, but it was in vain. She did not manage to save her children. Yoselyn spent a whole week in the hospital, immersed in an artificial coma. The doctors miraculously managed to save the life of the woman who had so fiercely tried to take her own life. When the nanny finally regained consciousness, she could not utter a word. Her face was too disfigured by the devices. With gestures, the woman only inquired about her own family, not saying a single word about the murdered children or the Krim family. Sedatives were regularly injected into her body. Later, when the ability to speak returned to Yoselyn, she was interrogated by investigators. This happened on November 3rd. Given the suspect's background, an interpreter fluent in Spanish was invited to the interrogation. It was then that some gruesome details of what had been done were revealed. Surprisingly, Yoselyn never confessed to the murder, although she readily told the detectives about her resentment toward the Krim family. She claimed that Marina and Kevin were too picky with her, made comments, and lectured her on exactly how she should take care of their children. The nanny refused a lawyer. Yoselyn confirmed that she was in the bathroom at the time of the crime, but refused to admit that it was her hand that had inflicted the fatal injuries on the little ones. When asked about the motives, she answered cryptically, they say, "Marina herself knows perfectly well why it all happened." Yoselyn's sister added a few more telling details to the picture. The day before the murder, an argument had flared up between the nanny and Marina. The reason was that Yoselyn had fed the children harmful, unhealthy food, and the Krim couple was extremely sensitive about the nutrition of their offspring. This conflict probably served as a kind of trigger for Yoselyn, whose psyche had long been teetering on the edge. The nanny spent a long time in the hospital, recovering from a suicide attempt. The woman was kept chained to the bed, and the ward was tirelessly guarded to prevent escape. Already on November 13th, she was officially charged with the intentional murder of the children. Yoselyn continued to deny her guilt, so she hired a lawyer to defend her in court. By that time, New York had already abolished the death penalty, so the woman faced a maximum punishment of life imprisonment. The court ordered a psychiatric examination. The conclusion was disappointing for the defendant. The experts found her fully sane and able to stand trial. The tentative start date of the trial was set for August 2013. The court proceedings dragged on for more than 5 years. In total, about 90 hearings were held in this case. Yoselyn's defenders repeatedly postponed the hearings, citing health problems of their client. They delayed and abused the right to postpone in every possible way in order to put off the sentencing for as long as possible. During the trial, the prosecution tried to reach a deal with Yoselyn. The woman was offered to plead guilty in exchange for 30 years in prison with the right to early release. Thus, she would have had a real chance to be released from prison at a little over 80 years old. But the defendant proudly rejected this offer. She stubbornly refused to give any explanations regarding the motives and circumstances of the crime. Instead, she completely put her fate in the hands of her defender. Yoselyn's defender persistently upheld the version that his client had become a hostage of her own mental disorders, which had reached a critical point. He claimed that the woman had lost the ability to control her actions at the moment of inflicting the fatal knife wounds on the little ones. The lawyer asserted that Yoselyn had heard satanic voices that allegedly commanded her to kill herself along with the children. He tried to prove that the nanny had suffered from hallucinations since her teenage years when she lived in the Dominican Republic. But alas, her ailment was not recognized then, and accordingly, no proper treatment was prescribed. The diagnosis was only talked about now, after Yoselyn's arrest on charges of this horrific crime. Several relatives and friends of the defendant testified that in the weeks leading up to the tragedy, Yoselyn's behavior had changed dramatically. The woman complained time and again that she was being haunted by eerie visions, demonic creatures, and ominous human shadows. The nanny constantly cried and spent too much time in prayers, begging the higher powers to expel the evil spirits from her life. Shortly before the fateful day, Yoselyn was noticed doing extremely uncharacteristic things. For example, she would fling pots and pans against the walls and floor of her kitchen, as if trying to drown out the annoying voices in her head. Sometimes, the nanny banged her head against the wall with screams to drive the demons out of herself. Meanwhile, Yoselyn's sisters blamed the Krim couple for the tragedy that had occurred. In their opinion, Kevin and Marina had shamelessly exploited the nanny, not giving her a minute to catch her breath. Moreover, the employers had missed the first alarming signs of her mental disorder and made the fatal mistake of entrusting the children to a woman in an unstable state. The psychotherapist who had been observing Yoselyn also testified in court. However, it was not in favor of the defense. The doctor assured that he had not noticed any obvious signs of acute psychosis in his patient, but had only diagnosed increased anxiety and mild depression due to her concerns about her son's fate. To dispel any doubts, an audio recording of Yoselyn's communication with the psychologist was played in the courtroom. Not once during all the sessions did the woman mention any voices in her head or other bizarre symptoms. The psychiatrist, who was speaking for the prosecution, also denied the likelihood of a serious mental illness in the defendant after carefully reviewing the case materials. Instead, he was inclined to believe that Yoselyn had problems with anger management, and she was simply trying to simulate a state of acute disorder. One of Yoselyn's family members let slip that perhaps the reason for her growing hostility toward the Krims was banal jealousy. They say, Yoselyn observed how the wealthy employers gave their children everything that she could not afford for her own son. No wonder the nanny had once given 4-year-old Jesus to his grandparents to be raised. The defendant's defenders also focused attention on the deterioration of relations between Yoselyn and the Krim couple shortly before the tragedy. In addition to her main duties of caring for the children, the nanny also did housework in the employer's home for extra pay. This greatly annoyed Yoselyn. The woman complained of allergies caused by the cleaning products. On top of that, the mistress Marina also threw side jobs from acquaintance families at the nanny. One time, Yoselyn agreed to take care of the children of the Krim's friends while their regular caregiver was on sick leave. But the very next day, the nanny refused to go back there. Marina received an indignant call from her friend and reproached Yoselyn in front of strangers for letting her down. This unfortunate scene took place near the school, so all the parents present witnessed the altercation. The nanny felt humiliated. She was certain that the employer had deliberately disgraced her in public. After the incident, Yoselyn sat in the park for a long time and cried bitterly with resentment. The tension in the relationship between the Krim family and their nanny was rapidly growing. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, the employers expressed increasing dissatisfaction with Yoselyn's work. The owners even warned the woman that she would have to look for a new place if she did not improve the quality of childcare. Marina believed that the nanny was spending too little time on activities with the kids, and had also taken to feeding them unhealthy food while the parents were not at home. And Yoselyn was deeply offended when Marina, for some reason, did not say goodbye to her the day before the fateful day. According to the lawyer, Yoselyn had accumulated plenty of reasons to hate her employers. The nanny suffered from chronic lack of money, was extremely dissatisfied with the constant changes in her schedule, because of which she sometimes even had to miss scheduled doctor's visits. However, the prosecutor firmly maintained that in reality, the murder of the Krim children was not the result of a sudden clouding of the mind due to mental illness, but was carefully planned in advance. He cited convincing evidence. For example, the day before the crime, Yoselyn returned home, took a painkiller for her headache, and then had a long conversation with her sister, to whom she turned with an unexpected instruction. They say, if something happens to her, let her take care of Jesus as her own. The sister was puzzled as to why Yoselyn had suddenly started talking about such strange things, but she assured that she would take care of her nephew. On the day of the murder, the nanny personally checked that her son had made it to school safely. They hugged goodbye. Yoselyn seemed to be saying farewell to the boy. Before leaving for work, the woman also performed very unusual actions. She left her sister a sealed envelope, which contained her personal documents, passport, driver's license, bank cards, insurance policy, and there was also cash. Yoselyn pasted a paper bag filled with family heirlooms dear to her heart, photographs, jewelry that had belonged to her late mother, on the door of her son's room. The prosecution argued that this was how the nanny insidiously said goodbye to her family, knowing in advance that she would not return home after committing the deliberate murder. The prosecutor categorically rejected the version of a spontaneous fit of anger or a sudden clouding of the mind because Yoselyn had acted consistently and cold-bloodedly. The prosecutor was convinced that Yoselyn had planned her farewell to her family in advance, realizing that she was not destined to return home after committing the gruesome crime. The prosecution insisted it was no coincidence that the nanny had deliberately taken the Krim children for a walk in the park instead of the ballet studio. She was trying to figure out how to while away the time so as not to run into the Mistress Marina by chance and return to the apartment just before her arrival. That's when the perpetrator dealt with the defenseless little ones. The prosecutor emphasized the psychological point of no return for Yoselyn was the arrival of her son Jesus in the USA. The young man became a kind of trigger that intensified the nanny's anxiety, depressive moods, feelings of guilt, and resentment towards the family where she worked. On April 18, 2018, the jury found Yoselyn Ortega guilty of first-degree murder of the children. The judge supported the verdict. In his address, he called the nanny's actions nothing but pure evil, rejecting the defense's arguments about the insanity of the woman who allegedly suffered from a mental disorder. At the same time, the servant of Themis admitted that Yoselyn's illness had undoubtedly played a significant role in the tragedy of that day. He expressed regret that neither the defendant herself nor her relatives had taken care to provide her with the necessary psychiatric help at the time. But despite this, the judge emphasized the planning and execution of the murder took place consistently and cold-bloodedly, which indicates a firm intention. Before the final sentence was announced, the mother of the murdered children, Marina Krim, took the floor.
The defendant may think she destroyed Lulu and Leo, but she is a failure in this too. Lulu and Leo are powerful forces. They are two stars now that will always lead us forward.
The former nanny only dejectedly hung her head at these words. Despite the tragedy they had experienced, the Krim family not only survived, but also managed to maintain their faith in life. Over time, the couple had two more sons, whom they named Felix and Linus. The father of the murdered children turned to the judge with a request to choose the most severe punishment for the murderer, which would guarantee that the woman would never be released from behind bars. Kevin emphasized that he had not noticed any signs of sincere remorse in Ortega, so he considered it fair that she should spend the rest of her life in a cramped cage of concrete and metal, waiting for death. The prosecutor supported the father's wish and insisted on life imprisonment without the right to early release. In his speech, he noted that Yoselyn had not only brutally taken the lives of the children entrusted to her, but had done so with particular cynicism and abuse. The nanny had deliberately lurked in the apartment to wait for the mother's return and revel in her reaction to the gruesome scene that opened behind the doors. After that, certainly, she had tried to take her own life, hoping to avoid responsibility for what she had done. Fortunately, the suicide attempt failed, so justice had to be served in full. Ortega's defender begged the judge to show mercy to her ward. They say the jurors were too moved by the mother's tears, so they could not reach a verdict by distancing themselves from emotions and analyzing the facts in cold blood and objectively. She argued that the judge, the jury members, and the entire courtroom were overly emotionally drained from the horrible details of the case throughout the trial. In the lawyer's opinion, the jurors simply had no way to be impartial. No wonder some of them had to be replaced during the hearings. Finally, the judge stated that this was the most difficult case of his career, and yet the servant of Themis sided with the prosecution. Having lost their children under such tragic circumstances, The Krim couple made every effort to somehow prevent a repeat of such a story. Thanks to their efforts, amendments were made to the legislation, according to which lying when applying for a job related to childcare would now be considered a crime. If this story has touched you, subscribe to my channel to stay informed about similar investigations. In the comments, we can discuss the ins and outs of this high-profile case in more detail. There is a widespread belief in the world that the lives of American schoolchildren revolve around football. This idea is reinforced by countless Hollywood movies, where the most popular and beautiful girl is always a cheerleader, and her boyfriend is invariably the captain of the football team. The people involved in the story we are about to discuss seem to have stepped off the screens of such films, but unfortunately, the happy ending typical of these movies did not happen in reality. You are watching the DBS channel, and today we will examine the case of Emma Walker. Central High School in Knoxville, Tennessee. The football stadium is illuminated by bright lights, and the energy of the fans is off the charts. The entire town has gathered to support their beloved football team, the Bobcats. The cheerleaders and the school band do not give the spectators a single second of respite. In the fall of 2014, a new face appeared among the cheerleaders. 14-year-old Emma Walker became the only freshman to make it onto the team that year. Everyone around her described her as a cheerful, energetic girl with a charming smile. Emma took her new activity with great responsibility, and she truly enjoyed the atmosphere of football competitions. However, despite her success in sports, Emma was also an extremely intelligent and diligent student. She dreamed of becoming a nurse in the neonatal unit to care for sick or prematurely born babies. During cheerleading practice, Emma caught the attention of one of the football team players who played the receiver position, William Riley Gall, known simply as Riley among his friends. He noticed Emma on the edge of the football field, and a spark immediately ignited between them. Riley, who was only 2 years older than Emma, had already managed to become the best player on the team and gained considerable popularity among his classmates. He was a member of the local church, loved video games, and according to his friends, had a rather specific sense of humor. At the time he met Emma, Riley was already in a romantic relationship with another girl. But soon after, he ended that relationship to start dating Emma, the most talented player on the school football team and a charming young cheerleader. In American high schools, such couples are simply destined to become popular among their peers. Riley quickly found common ground with Emma's family, and as her parents recounted, he made the impression of a pleasant, well-mannered, and polite young man. But after some time, their opinion of him changed when they learned that Riley had kept his promise to his ex-girlfriend and went with her to the junior prom. As for the senior prom, he went with Emma. Emma's parents considered such behavior frivolous and were displeased that, in their opinion, their daughter was not a priority for Riley. But Emma herself didn't seem too bothered by it. Her social media pages were filled with photos of her and Riley together, showing the couple having fun and spending time with each other. Emma's friends didn't know Riley well as a person. At first, they justified this by his shy and reserved nature. But over time, it became apparent that this was not the case, and they began to consider the guy somewhat strange. Many of them noted that Riley's behavior gradually revealed his desire to isolate Emma from communicating with anyone but himself. He showed himself as a jealous owner who seeks to control the girl's every move. Emma's friends, concerned about the situation, shared their fears with her. They warned that such relationships rarely lead to anything good and advised her to reconsider whether she really needed it. However, Emma dismissed their concerns, assuring them that it was just an outward impression and that there was nothing to worry about. Emma's parents, in an attempt to put an end to their daughter's toxic relationship, took away her phone to prevent contact with her boyfriend. But Riley found a way out. He bought Emma an iPod Touch so they could secretly text each other. Over the course of 2 years, the couple broke up and got back together many times. But with each breakup, their relationship became increasingly poisonous. The breakups became more serious and dramatic, and the fights more frequent. Riley constantly called Emma and bombarded her with messages one after another. When the girl got a job, he could wait for her at the entrance for hours to continue the conflict face to face. Once, in a fit of emotion, he even shouted, "You're dead to me. I'll write your obituary." But every time an offensive message was inevitably followed by an apology. "I'm sorry for my behavior. You're the most precious thing in the world to me." As Mark and Jill, Emma's parents recount, they repeatedly tried to persuade their daughter to end the relationship. He found a way to distance her from us and convince her that he was her only one, Jill shares. The more they tried to prevent Emma from seeing Riley, the more actively their daughter defended him. By the fall of 2016, the situation remained unchanged. Riley had enrolled in Maryville College, located a half-hour drive from home, while 16-year-old Emma continued to attend high school. I wish she would come back to Knoxville. I miss the days when we could see each other every day, she wrote to him. At the end of October 2016, Emma's parents, in a desperate attempt to help their daughter, forbade her from going anywhere except school and cheerleading practice. They began closely monitoring where she went, whom she met with, and what she did. And amazingly, it yielded the desired results. As Emma's father, Mark, notes, she began spending more time with her family and friends again, and her cheerfulness returned. Moreover, in correspondence with her friend Keegan, she reported that she and Riley had broken up peacefully after she saw photos of him hugging girls from his college. Emma's friends breathed a sigh of relief, as they had feared that Riley would not let her go so easily. On Friday, November 18, 2016, with her parents' permission, Emma went to a party at her close friend's house. Around 11:30 p.m., her friend Zach also arrived there. Emma quickly pulled him inside and told him that she was receiving mysterious text messages from an unknown number. One of the messages said, "Come outside alone if you don't want someone close to you to get hurt. Take your keys and go to your car. Otherwise, it won't end well for him." Emma assumed it might be a prank by one of Riley's friends. In response, she wrote that she would go to the police, but the threat had no effect, and the messages became even more alarming. One of them said that Riley's body had been dumped in front of the house. Emma and Zach went outside and saw that someone was indeed lying face down in a ditch nearby. It turned out to be Riley. When they approached him, he was holding his head and seemed disoriented. The guy said that he had been kidnapped and had no idea how he ended up there. Emma burst into tears and said through her sobs that they had broken up and asked him to leave her alone. Then Riley, extremely depressed, got up and walked down the street alone. On the way, he called his friend Noah, telling him about the kidnapping. But Noah didn't believe a word he said. Emma spent a restless night with her friends, and after 10 a.m., she headed home with her friend Haley, who lived nearby. As the girls were approaching the house, they noticed a suspicious young man dressed all in black walking down the street not far from Emma's place of residence. After dropping off Haley, Emma returned home alone. She went inside intending to change clothes before meeting her mom, but the mysterious stranger returned and started knocking and ringing the doorbell. The frightened girl sent messages to her friends and also to the person who, in her opinion, was always ready to come to her aid, Riley. In the message she wrote, "I hate you, but I need you right now." He replied that he was rushing to her, and when he finally arrived, the mysterious stranger was gone. However, Emma's friend Haley claimed that she recognized Riley himself as the guy in black. According to her, she saw his car parked nearby and even sent him a message asking what he was doing near Emma's house, to which Riley replied with a denial. Jill Walker, Emma's mother, having received an alarming message from her daughter about the suspicious stranger, came home and found Emma talking to Riley in the yard. The woman reminded the couple about the undesirability of his presence near her daughter and asked him to leave. Emma was trembling with fear, worried that it could have been a robber trying to break into the house. Jill, on the contrary, doubted the coincidence of the situation, but Emma continued to insist on Riley's non-involvement in the incident. After this incident, Jill and Mark Walker, extremely concerned about their daughter's safety, decided to drive the girl to work themselves in the morning, spend the day with her there, and return home together in the evening. The evening of Sunday, November 20th, 2016, at the Walker family home was quiet and peaceful. Emma was chatting with her friend Keegan and went to bed around midnight. Shortly after midnight, Riley, who had returned to Maryville, asked his roommate to borrow his phone. From this phone, he called Emma, and as Riley himself later claimed, during the conversation, Emma told him about her unwillingness to be together. According to him, after that, their conversation was suddenly cut off. Then Riley bombarded Emma with numerous text messages and made about 40 calls, leaving a myriad of voice messages on the answering machine. However, Emma did not respond, and eventually, Riley stopped trying to contact her. In the middle of the night, Mark, Emma's father, woke up to the sound of footsteps in the house and 2 slams of doors. He got up, walked around the house, looked into the bedrooms of Emma and her brother, but noticed nothing suspicious. Assuming that he had imagined it, Mark returned to bed. Around 6 in the morning, Jill went to Emma's room to wake her up for school. She called the girl by name, but she did not answer. Approaching the bed, the woman touched her daughter's leg, but Emma remained motionless. Looking at the girl's face, Jill immediately realized the need to call an ambulance immediately. Emma was pale and her lips had turned a bluish tint. Jill tried to feel for a pulse, but to no avail.
What's going on there?
I'm just trying to wake up my daughter for school, and she has no pulse.
Stay on the line. I'm transferring you to Rural Metro.
Rural Metro, can you tell me what's going on? She's non-responsive. She's gone. Okay, is she breathing? No. Her tongue's hanging out of her mouth. Is she laying on her back? Yes.
16-year-old Emma Walker was dead. Soon, the police arrived at the Walker house. Near Emma's mouth, a small amount of blood was found, and everything indicated that she had vomited after swallowing something. However, the police officer's attention was drawn to a barely noticeable but extremely suspicious hole in the wall of Emma's bedroom. It was a bullet hole. While the girl was sleeping, someone had shot her in the head through the wall. 2 shell casings were found outside the house, and law enforcement needed to determine where the second shot had hit. After examining the perimeter of the house, the police eventually discovered another bullet hole at approximately the same height as the first one. This shot was also fired in the direction of Emma's bedroom, and its exit hole was located directly next to her bed. Both holes were located about 1.5 meters from the bedroom window, and the shots were fired between 230 and 300 a.m. One bullet hit the girl behind her left ear and probably instantly took her life. The second bullet got stuck in Emma's pillow. Whoever committed this crime knew exactly the location of the room and the position in which the girl would be lying. Social media exploded with sympathetic messages about Emma's tragic death. Among them were tweets from Riley Gall. "I love you, Emma. I can't be there yet. It's too soon. I know that. You know how much I want to be there. But I understand that I can't. I love you. My beautiful Emma." 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 8. Be sure to remind God about it. I love you. Forever and always. Every day without Emma Walker. I love you, beautiful. And I know that you are in a better place now. During one of the matches of the local football team, the cheerleaders released pink balloons into the sky in memory of their prematurely deceased friend. When the police began questioning Emma Walker's family and friends, one name invariably came up again and again: Riley Gall. Some of Riley's friends, concerned about his condition after Emma's passing, told detectives about a secret he had shared with them the day after his alleged kidnapping. According to them, Riley said that he now feared for his own life, so he was carrying his grandfather's pistol with him. He even showed this weapon to his friend Alex. Another friend of Riley's, Noah, told investigators that Riley had inquired about how to get rid of fingerprints on a gun. However, Riley noted that he was asking not for himself, but for his roommate. It is noteworthy that just one day before Emma's death, Riley's grandfather reported the disappearance of this very pistol to the police. Riley also asked his friends Noah and Alex to help him get rid of the weapon by throwing it into the Tennessee River. But according to him, it was not at all because it had anything to do with Emma's death. He allegedly wanted to get rid of the pistol because he was afraid that it might get him into trouble and the police would try to link him to the case. On the day of the tragedy, the police talked to Riley for several hours, and the more he spoke, the more gaps appeared in his version of events.
I heard a stray bullet came to the wall, but that made no sense to me because it's her room. If a stray bullet hit the wall, it would have to be from the backyard because that's where her window is. No, I don't know. That one didn't make sense to me, but those are the main 3.
Despite his assurances that he was in Maryville at the time of the crime, an analysis of his phone revealed that this was not true. According to satellite data, at midnight, his phone was on the highway on the way from Maryville to Knoxville. Moreover, around 3:45 a.m., his phone was detected near Emma's house, while, according to the forensic examination, the girl died between 230 and 3:00 a.m. The officers also questioned Riley about the gun and all the information obtained from Noah and Alex, but he denied ever discussing anything like that with them. The detective asked him, "Did you ever talk to Noah about removing fingerprints from a gun?" Riley replied, "No." At this stage, Riley remained the only suspect, but there was still insufficient evidence for an arrest. As soon as he left the police station, he sent a message to Noah and Alex, asking them not to communicate with the police anymore and ordering them to delete all messages from him. Riley had no idea that his friends would ignore his request and continue to cooperate with law enforcement, as they had been doing from the first minutes after learning about Emma's death. They wanted to assist the investigation and knew they could help find the murder weapon. At first, the police hesitated, warning about possible risks to their safety. But Alex and Noah resolutely stated that it did not scare them, and they were determined to help solve this case. "I wasn't afraid for myself. I was afraid that if we didn't do this, no one would answer for Emma's death," said Alex McCarthy. In close cooperation with the police, Noah and Alex devised a plan to expose Riley's lies. They agreed with him to supposedly help throw his grandfather's pistol into the river. According to the plan, the police were to wait nearby and arrest Riley as soon as he took out the weapon. Alex and Noah, in turn, were supposed to send the officers a code word that would serve as a signal for action. The guys were equipped with microphones and hidden cameras, and the operation finally started.
They interrogated me for 2.5 hours. If they could, they would have arrested me already.
After filming this video, all three of them went to the river, picking up the gun that Riley had been hiding in his stepfather's house the whole time. When they finally arrived at the location, Riley pulled out the gun, intending to get rid of it, but thanks to Noah and Alex, the police were already on standby. 48 hours after the discovery of Emma's lifeless body, the perpetrator was arrested. Riley Gall was charged with the murder of Emma Walker. In the trunk of his car, the police found black clothing and shoes. It became evident that a few days earlier, it was Riley who was the mysterious stranger in black who had been pounding on the door of the Walker family's house. The trial of Riley Gall began only a year and a half later, and he pleaded not guilty. He chose not to testify, and his lawyers did not call any witnesses. The defense was not built on an attempt to deny the fact of the shots. Their main goal was to prove that the bullets that took Emma's life hit her accidentally. They insisted that by shooting at the walls, Riley was simply trying to scare Emma. He supposedly could not have imagined that the bullets would go through the walls. Thus, he allegedly wanted her to get scared and turn to him for help, and then he would have a chance to restore their relationship. His lawyer stated that Riley wanted Emma to see him as a hero who had rushed to save her. But everything went wrong when the bullets hit the young girl sleeping peacefully in her bedroom, taking her life. Further, the defense appealed to the jury, stating that even if they found him guilty, it could only be manslaughter, which, by the way, carries a much shorter prison sentence compared to intentional murder. Lawyer's statement, "Everything they say about intent towards Emma Walker is fully consistent with an attempt to scare her, because by scaring her, he hoped that she would contact him, and he would try to rekindle the relationship." I'm not saying it's logical. Don't think I'm claiming that there's any logic to it, because there isn't. But it fits the facts known to us from the witnesses. It fits the facts stated by the prosecutor. And we know that such behavior was typical of Emma, as she had recently already asked Riley to save her. However, the prosecutor insisted that it was intentional murder motivated by anger.
I knew how to fire a gun. I thought that he pled guilty in the beginning of this case to shooting a firearm into an occupied dwelling. I thought he did that. And so the relevance of whether or not he knew how to shoot a gun was gone. It doesn't matter. He knows how to shoot a gun. He admits to it. And so yet you spend time in your closing argument to say why he's only learned from PlayStation and to Call of Duty and wall banging that you can shoot through walls with a gun. It's a waste of your time. He knew how to shoot a gun. He pled guilty to shooting a gun.
Will you please stand? Mr. Gilder, in count one, the first defined offense charging the defendant with first-degree murder, did the jury reach a verdict?
Yes, we did.
What is your verdict?
Guilty.
And for the lesser included offense of stalking, did the jury reach a verdict?
We did.
What is your verdict?
Guilty.
The jury found William Riley Gall guilty of first-degree murder, as well as stalking, theft, and illegal possession of a firearm. In the state of Tennessee, a conviction for first-degree murder automatically carries a life sentence. Riley Gall was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole no earlier than after 51 years. By that time, he will be over 70 years old. In May 2021, it became known that Riley Gall was trying to seek an acquittal, citing insufficient evidence. However, his petition was denied. Emma was supposed to graduate from high school in 2018, but instead, her family received her diploma. Her graduation cap and gown lay on the chair that would have been her seat. At the school where she studied, a scholarship was established in her honor. Jill Walker, Emma's mother, said that her daughter's love for animals and desire to become a nurse for newborns eloquently testified to the kind of person she was. Since then, the Walker family has opened a dog shelter and a neonatal rehabilitation unit at the Children's Hospital of East Tennessee, which also bear Emma Walker's name. According to Jill Walker, everything they do is aimed at ensuring that people remember Emma and never forget that they should always be a little kinder. The story of Emma Walker and Riley Gall is a tragic tale that, unfortunately, is not an isolated case in our society. Too often, we hear about young lives cut short due to toxic relationships, obsession, and violence. This case has become a painful reminder of the importance of vigilance and awareness of the signs of dangerous behavior in our loved ones. Regardless of whether you are a parent, friend, partner, or child, your personal safety should always come first. If you notice alarming signals in the behavior of someone in your circle, they should not be ignored. Excessive jealousy, a desire to control, emotional manipulation, and other forms of abusive behavior should never be perceived as normal. These red flags can be warning signs of potential danger. In such situations, it is vital to seek help from appropriate support services. Do not be afraid to share your concerns with trusted people, parents, friends, teachers, or professionals. There are special hotlines and organizations ready to provide counseling and assistance to those who find themselves in toxic or abusive relationships. Do not hesitate to reach out to them. It can save your life or the lives of your loved ones. Remember that you are not alone in this struggle. Too many people suffer in silence, afraid to speak about their pain. But silence only gives the abuser more power. By telling your story, you not only liberate yourself, but also empower others to do the same. Together, we can create a society where toxic relationships and domestic violence have no place. The tragedy of Emma Walker is a call to action for each and every one of us. We must be vigilant, attentive to alarming signs, and ready to intervene when necessary. We must raise our children in a spirit of respect, equality, and nonviolence. We must build a world where every person feels valued, loved, and protected. Let Emma's story serve as a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of caring for one another. Let her legacy live on in the good deeds of her family and in society's determination to put an end to domestic violence. And let each of us find the strength to be a light in the darkness for those who need it. Because only together, by taking care of each other, can we prevent such tragedies in the future and build a world filled with compassion, respect, and love. Friends, I'm grateful to you for watching until this moment. Know that you are the best. Write your thoughts about this case in the comments, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel. I love you all immensely. I also invite you to watch my other videos. Believe me, they are no less interesting. I'm waiting for you there.